A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
Hey, I'm Kimberly. If you're listening to this, I guess you could say I'm deep in the throes of a twisted tale, one I never expected to live out. It's raw, it's personal, and it might just hit close to home for some of you. So grab a seat, because this story is a roller coaster, and it all starts in the bustling heart of Chicago, where beneath the shimmering skyline, I found myself entangled with a man who would turn my world upside down. The moment I met Derek, it was as if he had stepped straight out of a romance novel. With his charming smile and that effortless charisma, he could light up the darkest rooms. Everyone adored him, and at first, so did I. He was the life of every party, the guy who effortlessly navigated conversations and had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. But, as they say, nothing is ever as it seems. We met at a trendy coffee shop called The Daily Grind, a place filled with the rich aroma of fresh espresso and the sound of clinking cups. I had just moved to the city, struggling to find my footing after a tough breakup, and Derek seemed to embody everything I thought I wanted. We hit it off instantly, or at least I thought we did. Little did I know, I had unknowingly signed up for a masterclass in manipulation. My closest friends, Sarah and Mia, were wary of Derek from the start. They'd roll their eyes and give me that knowing look whenever I mentioned him, but I brushed aside their concerns. "You're just jealous," I'd chuckle, oblivious to the cracks that were beginning to form in the facade he had so skillfully crafted. They couldn't see what I saw, the dreamy moments, the late-night conversations filled with laughter. They hadn't felt the rush of excitement that came with every text from him. But it didn't take long for the reality to seep in, like a slow poison. Over the course of the months, the charming persona began to unravel. With Derek, love was an illusion wrapped in a shiny bow, but soon, that bow began to fray. His need for validation morphed into control. Every compliment he'd given me was laced with a condition, and every loving moment was followed by a sting, a reminder that I was never quite good enough. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself caught in his web. Friends and family became distant memories. I was isolated, a prisoner in my own mind, questioning my worth with every dismissive glance he threw my way. I watched helplessly as he perfected the art of gaslighting, turning my reality into something I couldn't recognize. But here's the twist that no one saw coming, not even me. It was during one of those late-night conversations when he casually mentioned his ex-girlfriend, Emily, with such disdain that it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he spoke, the venom behind every syllable. That's when the seed of revenge was planted in my heart, and from then on, it would grow into a twisted obsession. Now, as I sit here, recounting this bizarre chapter of my life, I realize that revenge isn't just a plot in a story, it's a journey, a path I never wanted to walk, but here I am, ready to take the first step. And this time, it's my turn to be heard. It's time to face the narcissist of the highest caliber and show him that I won't be silenced any longer. So, buckle up as I unveil the thrilling and dark details of my plan, the lessons learned, and the indelible mark this experience has left on me. Revenge may not be sweet, but oh, was it ever satisfying. The day everything changed began like any other. The sun streamed through my apartment window, filtering through the thin curtains as I sipped my morning coffee, an elixir of hope I clung to in the dwindling light of my reality. Derek had stayed over, his presence a magnet that drew me in, yet I felt horrified by the shadows lurking behind his charming smile. That day, I should have sensed the storm brewing beneath the surface. Instead, I was blissfully ignorant. I had planned a dinner for us, hoping to rekindle the magic we once had. I wanted to show him that I still believed in us, that I still believed in love. I meticulously prepared his favorite meal, hoping to recreate those early days filled with laughter and warmth. As I stirred the sauce, my heart raced with excitement. Finally, I thought, maybe tonight would be different. But the moment he walked in, his expression shifted. I felt that familiar chill creep down my spine as he glanced around, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face as he realized I hadn't done enough. "Did you actually think I'd want to just eat at home tonight?" he sneered, shrugging off my efforts as if they were nothing more than a pathetic joke. My heart plummeted. I had poured my soul into that meal, and he had tossed it away like yesterday's trash. Trying to regain my footing, I suggested a nice restaurant nearby. But instead of appreciation, I was met with a dismissive wave as he turned toward his phone. He was scrolling, immersed in his own world while I stood there, a ghost in my own home, feeling the walls close in around me. Hours later, after yet another failed attempt at connection, I snapped. "Why do you treat me like this? Why do you make me feel so small?" I blurted out, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and defeat. He looked up from his screen, genuinely taken aback, as if he had no idea what I was talking about. "Oh, come on, Kimberly. You're being dramatic," he replied, veering into that all too familiar territory, belittlement. "You're lucky to be with me. Just look at yourself. A little self-awareness would go a long way." Those words cut deeper than any knife. It felt as if he had stripped away my entire identity, layer by layer, leaving me raw and exposed. Had I really let myself be reduced to this trembling shadow of who I once was? The realization crashed over me like a wave, and suddenly, the memory of Emily resurfaced, haunting me like a specter. I remembered how he had disparaged her, how he'd made her seem vindictive and malicious when all I could see was a woman who had once loved him. I felt her pain morphing with my own, intertwining in a desperate plea for justice. That night, it hit me, Derek didn't just manipulate me, he was a master of emotional destruction, a narcissist who needed to feel superior at all costs. I had been a pawn in his game, but not anymore. In that moment of anguish, something inside me snapped, igniting a fire that I never knew existed. I could either wallow in my misery or channel that rage toward something more powerful, something that would show Derek the truth of his own cruelty. The next day, I turned my focus toward Emily. I reached out to her, my fingers trembling as I typed the message. I told her everything, how he spoke of her, how he treated me, and how I had seen the cracks in his facade. Through exchanged words, I found a friend in her, a comrade who had suffered at the hands of a man who had no regard for anyone but himself. Little did Derek know, I was beginning to plot a way to expose him, to unveil the intricate web of lies he had spun around all of us. As I worked with Emily to gather evidence of Derek's manipulation, text messages, stories of emotional abuse, and shared experiences, I could feel my resolve strengthening. No longer would I remain a victim, cowering in the shadows of his toxic behavior. I wanted Derek to feel the same despair, the same sense of loss that he had inflicted on so many. With each passing day, my emotions transformed from sorrow to determination. I was no longer just Kimberly, the love-struck girl. I was a force to be reckoned with, fueled by the betrayal and injustice I had endured. As I prepared to set my plan in motion, the realization settled in that revenge might not only offer satisfaction but a sense of closure I had yearned for since the very beginning. And so began my journey of vengeance, drawing the curtain back on the narcissist of the highest caliber, Derek, who had underestimated the strength that lay dormant within me. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed a shift in my demeanor. The quiet resolve I had uncovered began to give way to a darker energy, a thrill that coursed through me with each piece of evidence I gathered against Derek. My emotions, once a chaotic storm of love, confusion, and despair, turned into a laser-focused mission. However, as I delved deeper, things escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. Derek was clever. He could sense the change in me, the way I had begun to stand my ground during our conversations. His charm faded into annoyance. One evening, we were out with friends, and I dared to laugh a little too freely, sharing an inside joke with Mia. I could feel his gaze burning into me, his hostility palpable. Afterward, he pulled me aside, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're so funny, don't you? You think your little games will make me forget who's in control?" The threat hung heavy in the air, and I felt the cocktail of fear and anger twist in my stomach. But it only fueled my resolve. I was no longer a puppet dancing to his tune, I was the knife hidden beneath the silk. Each verbal jab he threw my way, every belittling comment, solidified my plan. It became a sick game, who could outwit the other. I toyed with the idea that if he was going to play the villain, I might as well play the part of an avenger. Then there was that night, the night that would ignite the chain of events that would lead to my ultimate confrontation with him. I had spent hours preparing for a party Derek was throwing at his apartment. As I set out my outfit, something daring, something confident, I felt empowered. But the moment I walked through the door, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, I was hit with a tidal wave of Derek's narcissistic energy. His attention was fixed on me, but it wasn't admiration I saw, it was barely contained contempt. "Wow, you clean up nice, Kimberly," he said, with a smirk. "Did you pull out all the stops for me tonight?" His friends laughed, but it was the way he said it, like I was a cheap, hastily assembled outfit he picked up at a discount store. I held my chin high, the resolve I'd been nurturing bubbling to the surface. "I'd say I'm dressing for myself, not just for you," I replied, feeling an unfamiliar heaviness lift from my chest. But that only seemed to agitate him more. Throughout the night, he would make snide remarks, cutting glances in my direction whenever I engaged with others. It became an unbearable game of humiliation. He was artfully weaving a narrative that turned everyone against me, painting me as dramatic and overreactive. As the laughter of his friends echoed through the room, I felt invisible, drowning in my own agony while he thrived in his kingdom of narcissism. The tension was suffocating. I had to get out. I excused myself and stepped out onto the balcony, cold air wrapping around me like a lifeline. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from Emily. "Don't let him get to you. Remember, you're strong. You can do this." Tears stung my eyes as I read her words. She had become my anchor in this storm. I took a deep breath, wiping my eyes and trying to reclaim the courage I felt slipping away. But just then, the door swung open, and there he stood, Derek, the embodiment of chaos. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded, his tone sharp, slicing through the serene night. "Hiding? You know, you're not that special. Don't think you can just decide when to show others your little strong side." I felt that mix of anger and despair crash into me again. "I'm not hiding. I'm taking a moment because being around you is exhausting," I fired back, each word resonating with the determination I had been cultivating. His eyes darkened, and he stepped closer, invading my personal space, his breath hot against my face. "You think you're tough, huh? You're just a scared little girl trying to prove herself. You don't want to mess with me, Kimberly. You have no idea who you're dealing with." His threats sent shivers down my spine, but within me, that fire blazed brighter. I wasn't scared. I was emboldened. I stood my ground, meeting his gaze unflinchingly, and in that moment, I realized how far I'd come. The little girl he once berated was now on the cusp of destroying the very foundation of his carefully crafted world. My heart raced as I held my ground, feeling the tension pulsate between us like an electric current. Derek's face contorted with rage, and I relished the madness in his eyes. He thought he could intimidate me, toy with my emotions like I was a marionette dangling on strings he controlled. But as I stood there, bathed in the pale light of the moon, I felt a shift inside me, an awakening, a clarity that sliced through the fog of despair he had wrapped around me. "You don't scare me anymore," I declared, the words spilling from my lips like molten lava, hot and fierce. A strange sense of power surged through me, igniting that ember of revenge I'd been nursing for weeks. In his twisted world where he wore the crown, I suddenly saw the path laid out before me. What if I could turn the tables and show him that the very tactics he used to manipulate and belittle could be his downfall? In that moment, I recalled how he had spoken of Emily, his ex-girlfriend, with such venom. It had ignited something in me then, but standing here now, it felt like a complete revelation. I no longer wanted just to survive, I wanted to dismantle his empire of deceit brick by brick. I envisioned Emily by my side, the two of us standing tall against the tide of Derek's narcissism. He had painted us both as weak, but together, we could be formidable. "Tell me, Derek," I pressed, my voice steady despite the turmoil churning within. "What are you so afraid of? Is it that I might actually stand up for myself? That I might expose you for who you really are?" For a moment, he looked taken aback, as if my words were foreign to him. His bravado wavered, and I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Was he truly the all-powerful ruler he believed himself to be? "I'm not afraid of you, Kimberly," he spat, but I could hear the lie woven into his tone. "You're nothing without me." And that's when it hit me, the realization burned brighter than anything I'd felt before. I had spent so long believing I was nothing without him, that I needed his validation to be whole. But in this moment, in this raw confrontation, I felt the shackles of his control shatter around me. I was not just the girl he had manipulated, I was a woman rediscovering her strength. It was time to take action. I was ready to harness this newfound clarity and use it as a weapon. I had the power to expose him, not just to myself but to everyone in his carefully curated world. He had crafted a narrative where he reigned supreme, but I realized that I could rewrite that story, our story. The thought of Emily standing by my side filled me with determination. I could almost hear her laughter, feel her unwavering support echoing through my mind. Together, we could make him regret ever underestimating us. I wanted Derek to feel the very loneliness he had inflicted upon me, to face the emptiness of a world stripped of his facade. The plan began to take shape in my mind, crystallizing like a clear picture in a foggy room. I needed to gather evidence, text messages, voicemails, any trace of his cruel words and manipulative tactics, and I needed to do it fast. I imagined a confrontation that would leave him exposed and vulnerable, revealing the monster beneath the charming mask. Suddenly, I saw myself standing before a gathering of friends, the very people he had manipulated into believing his lies. I would unveil the truth, letting darkness spill into the light. The only way to eradicate a narcissist of the highest caliber was to shine the spotlight directly on him, and I was ready to take that step. As I turned to walk back into the party, I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. The shadows of uncertainty and self-doubt began to dissipate, replaced with a fierce determination. Derek would no longer be the puppeteer pulling my strings, he would face the consequences of his actions. With Emily's support and my resolve, I was no longer a victim, I was a warrior ready to wage war against the man who had tried to steal my light. As I stepped back into the party, I felt a smile dance on my lips, a predatory smile filled with purpose. I would make Derek pay, not out of spite but to reclaim the narrative he had woven around our lives. I was ready to step into the darkness and confront the narcissist of the highest caliber, and I would emerge victorious. I spent the next few days spiraling with excitement and anxiety, plotting every detail of the plan that would serve justice, not only to Derek but also to the countless others who had fallen victim to his charm. The scheme unfolded like a blueprint in my mind, each layer intricately designed to expose him in a way that would leave no room for denial or manipulation. The foundation of my plan hinged on concrete proof of his manipulative behavior. I contacted Emily, and together, we started documenting everything. We crafted a shared folder on Google Drive, a secret repository for our evidence. I gathered screenshots of all the text messages where Derek belittled me, where he flirted with other women while I languished in silence. I even recorded his voice during our conversations, where the insidious gaslighting seeped out like poison. Emily shared her experiences, recalling Derek's condescending messages, his dismissive comments, the times he had belittled her achievements. It was cathartic for both of us to validate each other's pain. We were no longer isolated victims. Instead, we became allies against a common enemy. Our compilation of evidence grew daily. Each entry filled me with a mix of dread and excitement, as if I were collecting ammunition for the battle ahead. But I kept reminding myself that this was not just about revenge, this was about reclaiming our identities and standing up against his brand of cruelty. Next, I set out to cultivate a network of allies. I reached out to mutual friends to gauge their perspectives about Derek, subtly steering conversations toward stories of his behavior. Some friends revealed their discomfort with how he treated me, while others admitted they had witnessed similar moments of his arrogance and condescension with Emily. The more I sought out these opinions, the more emboldened I felt. Mia and Sarah played pivotal roles in preparing for the climax of my plan. They were fiercely loyal and supportive and offered to be part of the gathering I envisioned, a gathering where Derek would finally be held accountable. I began painting a picture of a dinner party, an evening where everyone would have a chance to contribute to the conversation, to shed light on the toxic nature of Derek's behavior. I secured a date for the get-together, an elaborate dinner at my apartment. I meticulously planned the details, aiming to create an atmosphere that felt warm and inviting, yet charged with tension. I invited close friends who were already skeptical of Derek, those who had seen his true colors but hadn't had the opportunity to express their feelings in front of him. On the night of the dinner, the table was set to perfection, adorned with candles and delicate floral arrangements. But behind the facade of normalcy, I felt the weight of anticipation in the air. Emily arrived early, and we shared a knowing glance. Our battle was about to begin. As guests trickled in, the energy shifted. Laughter and chatter filled the room, but I felt my heart race as I anticipated Derek's arrival. When he finally walked through the door, I could see the flicker of arrogance in his eyes, the charming smile ready to distract everyone from the truth lurking beneath his surface. Dinner progressed with typical small talk, but I knew the time would come soon. As we shifted to the living room, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. It was time to unveil the truth. I took a deep breath, knowing this was my moment. "Thanks for coming, everyone," I began, my voice steady despite the quiver of excitement flooding through me. Tonight, I wanted to celebrate friendship, and also to shed light on something serious. I know Derek has shared stories of his past relationships, particularly with Emily, and I believe it's essential that we discuss the impact his behavior has had on those around him. Gasps erupted from some of my friends, while others exchanged furtive glances. Derek's face paled. For a moment, the mask slipped. "Are you serious?" he scoffed, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "This is ridiculous. I thought this was a friendly dinner, not an attack." I pressed on, undeterred. "This is an important conversation, Derek. We're all friends here, and friends should support one another. Emily, would you like to share your experiences?" As Emily stood to speak, I could see Derek's expression shift from incredulous amusement to a mask of growing panic. He opened and closed his mouth, searching for words but unable to form a coherent response. Emily's voice rang out, powerful and unwavering, as she recounted the moments of emotional manipulation she had endured, the feelings of inadequacy that had plagued her long after their relationship ended. Step 5. The tension in the room thickened as Emily spoke, her voice steady and filled with emotion. Her words poured out like a dam bursting, igniting memories and feelings among the guests that had long been buried. I thought I was crazy, you know. I believed I was the problem, she said, her gaze unwavering as she turned to Derek. But now I see that it was you all along. You twisted my reality until I no longer recognized myself. Derek's face flushed crimson, the mask of charm slipping further as sweat beaded on his forehead. The laughter and lightness of the evening were replaced by a palpable tension, with everyone hanging on Emily's every word. I remember the moments when you would play mind games with me, Derek, she continued, her voice rising with conviction. Every time I tried to voice my feelings, you'd turn it around on me, making me feel like I was overreacting. It was suffocating. I could feel Derek's eyes darting around the room, searching for an ally, a foothold in the chaos unfolding around him. But the faces of our friends, Mia, Sarah, and even some of Derek's own buddies, had transformed from friendly smiles into expressions of concern and empathy. The power dynamic was shifting, and I reveled in it. Listen, this is all nonsense, Derek interjected sharply, desperation creeping into his tone. You're both just bitter ex-girlfriends trying to ruin my night. You need to grow up. Is that really your defense? I shot back, cutting through his attempt at dismissal like a knife. Do you think calling us bitter will erase the truth? You've spent your life creating this illusion, this perfect facade, and it's time we brought it crashing down. As I spoke, I felt a surge of power wash over me. The words felt like a rallying cry, a declaration of my newfound strength. The room felt charged, as if everyone could sense the reckoning at hand. Let's not forget the countless times you made people feel inferior to you, I continued, my heart racing. How you belittle Mia's achievements or mock Sarah's dreams. You don't get to play the victim anymore. Derek's facade of confidence began to crack, his snide remarks replaced by a creeping terror as the weight of our words pressed down on him. He was trapped in a corner, and we were the hunters ready to make a kill. You think you can just bully everyone into silence? I asked, my voice firm and unyielding. You've thrived on fear and insecurity, but tonight, that ends. We will not be silenced any longer. The guests began murmuring in agreement, and for the first time, I saw the tide turn. People began to share their own stories, their own moments of discomfort around Derek, moments he had brushed off as trivial. Laughter began to fade as the gravity of what he had done seeped into the atmosphere. One friend, Jason, spoke up. I remember when you made fun of me for not landing that promotion, Derek. You laughed and said I'd never be good enough for the job. It's time you faced the consequences of your actions. Each voice added weight to our collective truth, and with every word shared, Derek's bravado dwindled. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting back and forth, desperately trying to regain control over the room. But the truth had broken through his carefully constructed walls, and it felt so liberating. Derek, I said, leaning in slightly to catch his gaze, you've manipulated all of us for too long. But this isn't just about revenge, it's about healing. It's about reclaiming our power and standing against the toxicity you represent. As I spoke those words, the mood shifted further, almost like the clouds parting to reveal the sun. There was an energy in the room now, a shared understanding of the reality Derek had tried to obscure. The shock on Derek's face morphed into a mixture of rage and disbelief. You all are just jealous. You can't blame me for your failures, he spat, desperately attempting to shift the narrative. But it was too late. The cracks in his facade were showing, and the unraveling had begun. Jealous? No, Derek. We're tired, I corrected him calmly. Tired of feeling like we have to walk on eggshells around you, tired of your egotistical behavior that steals the light from everyone else in the room. It's time for accountability. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's bravado had all but collapsed, leaving him exposed in front of the friends he had once commanded. It was then that I noticed the glimmer of recognition in the air hung heavy in the room after our confrontation, like the final notes of a symphony cascading into silence. Derek stood there, a broken man, stripped of the power he had so skillfully wielded. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes: he was no longer in control of the narrative. I felt a mix of exhilaration and disbelief as the weight of everything that had transpired began to settle in. What happened next was almost surreal. With every word spoken against him, I felt a layer of my own pain lifting. Friends who had once viewed me with sympathy now surrounded me with support, offering nods of understanding and words of encouragement. They shared their stories of courage, resilience, and the struggle of breaking free from toxic relationships. It was as though we were weaving an invisible tapestry of healing, each thread intertwining our experiences, casting a warm glow over the room. But for Derek, the atmosphere shifted from one of camaraderie to an abyss of humiliation. He could only stand there, dumbfounded, as the weight of our shared truths pulled him down into despair. Emotional outbursts rolled through his being, first denial, then feigned laughter, and finally, anger bubbling forth like a volcano ready to erupt. "You're all making a mistake," he spat, voice laced with venom. "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm better than all of you." At that moment, the laughter and camaraderie faded into a solemn hush. I watched as my friends exchanged looks of concern, their faces revealing a mixture of sympathy and frustration. They weren't there to judge but to witness the reality of a man who had fully revealed himself, a man who thrived on chaos, who reveled in diminishing others to elevate his own sense of worth. My heart raced as I confronted Derek again. "You don't get to shift the blame anymore. Your words have consequences. We're not here to diminish you, we're here to reclaim our stories. And you've lost all power over us tonight." He took a step back, as if my words physically struck him. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, trying to concoct a plan to regain his footing. But the curtain had been drawn back, and the audience had seen the dark magic behind the puppet show. Derek was no longer the king in his kingdom, he was a man standing in the ruins of his empire, surrounded by the laughter of those who had taken back their joy. As the evening progressed, I noticed how the energy shifted. Friends took turns sharing their own experiences, moments Derek had casually dismissed or belittled. It felt cathartic, like a collective exorcism, as we laid bare the wounds he had inflicted, visible or not. I glanced at Emily, who was beaming with pride as she spoke about her own journey of healing. We had turned from victims into warriors, armed with the truth. When the night finally drew to a close, the guests gradually filtered out, leaving behind a sense of camaraderie and empowerment. My apartment, once a space of chaos and despair, felt like a sanctuary of resilience. Derek had stormed out after the confrontation, his ego shattered and his reputation in tatters, but I felt no remorse for him. He had created this ripple of devastation, and now it was crashing back upon him, unraveling everything he had carefully constructed. In the following days, the aftermath of that dinner party reverberated through my life like an echo. I had expected some backlash. After all, no one ever walks away unscathed from a confrontation with a narcissist. But what I didn't anticipate was the wave of support that flooded in from my friends and family. They rallied around me, emboldened by the stand I had taken. They sent messages, called to check in, and even shared their own experiences of overcoming toxic relationships, bolstering my belief that I had not just conquered Derek, but had also created a safe space for others to find their voices. Yet, as much as I reveled in this newfound empowerment, I couldn't shake the residual feelings of anxiety that crept in. Derek had been a fixture in my life, and his sudden absence left me grappling with the remnants of fear he'd instilled in me. I realized I had to confront the emotional scars he had left behind, the invisible bruises that still lingered beneath the surface. Despite feeling empowered, I decided to seek therapy. I wanted to unlock the chains he'd wrapped around my heart and mind, to explore the depths of my own self-worth beyond the confines of his manipulation. Each session became a journey of rediscovery, where the therapist helped me untangle the threads woven into my psyche, reminding me that I was worthy, strong, and deserving of love. I also learned that revenge doesn't always mean retribution.
Hey everyone. My name is Joanna, and I feel like I need to share my story, a confession, if you will. What started as a seemingly harmless neighborhood dispute turned into a twisted tale of betrayal, anger, and, ultimately, revenge. If you're listening, I hope it serves as a reminder of how quickly things can escalate, and the lengths we go to stand up for the ones we love. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, one of those picture-perfect places where the grass is always manicured, children run freely on the sidewalks, and the smell of freshly baked cookies drifts through the air during the holidays. It was the kind of place where people waved hello to each other, or at least they did, up until last summer. My mom, an unwaveringly kind and gentle woman, has lived in this house for over 20 years. She worked tirelessly to provide for me as a single parent, pouring her heart and soul into making our home a sanctuary. Then there's our neighbor, Greg. He moved in a couple of years ago, and at first, I thought he was just a typical guy trying to fit into the neighborhood. But as I got to know him, I realized he was anything but ordinary. Greg is loud, brash, and, frankly, incredibly rude. He seems to thrive on confrontation, always looking for an argument, always trying to exert his dominance. And trust me, he made it clear that he had no respect for anyone around him, especially my mom. The catalyst for everything that happened came on a sunny afternoon in June. I remember it vividly because the sun shone brightly through the kitchen window as my mom and I prepared lunch together, laughing between slices of fresh avocado and whole grain bread. The smell of the garden roses wafted in, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But then, Greg decided to take his trash out, and what followed turned our world upside down. I don't know what went wrong that day. Maybe it was the way my mom had parked her car slightly askew in our driveway. But whatever the reason, Greg stormed over, his face twisted with irritation. I watched from the kitchen as he got in her face, and I'll never forget the way my mom's smile faltered, her eyes widening in confusion at the venom in his voice. "Why don't you go F yourself, Karen?" He spat, the words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. My heart raced as I witnessed this interaction. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. How dare he speak to her like that? My mom had always told me to take the high road, to rise above pettiness. But in that moment, all I wanted was to protect her. To lash out, to scream at him to get back into his bubble of a house and shut the hell up. But I didn't. I stood frozen, feeling the fire of injustice ignite inside me. That's when I knew I couldn't just let this go. It wasn't just a simple neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a deeper wound, a call to action. And in my heart, I started plotting my revenge, crafting a plan that would show Greg just how wrong he was to mess with my mom, and ultimately, with me. So, buckle up, because what I'm about to share is not just a story about retaliation, it's a deep dive into the chaos of emotions that come with standing up for your loved ones. Remember, sometimes the decision to fight back can change everything. As I watched Greg's face contort with rage, a familiar anger bubbled up inside me. It was suffocating, like a thick fog that made it difficult to think clearly. My mother, the embodiment of grace, deserved better than this. I could see how hard she was trying to keep her composure. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on her apron. I wanted to rush in, to shield her from his tirade, but instead, I stood there, paralyzed by a mix of disbelief and fury. "Why are you even talking to me like that?" Mom asked, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "This is my home, and I'm not doing anything wrong." To my horror, Greg laughed, a deep, mocking sound that echoed off the walls of our home. "Your home? Spare me. You think this is your territory? You don't even know how to park a car. You need to listen to someone who knows how to keep a neighborhood running." It felt like a slap in the face. I'd always been proud of my mom's caring spirit. She volunteered at the local shelter, hosted block parties, and always greeted her neighbors with a warm smile. And now, here was Greg, belittling her in public without a shred of remorse. I wanted to scream, to tell him that my mom was the heart of our community, not some nuisance. But I stayed silent, trapped in my own rage. Greg continued his tirade, spewing insults that cut deeper than I could have imagined. "You're just some washed-up loser pretending to be a saint. You're a joke, a pathetic little Karen that everyone laughs at behind your back." That was it. It was as if I had been waiting for the dam to break, and his words were the final straw. I could see my mother's face turn pale, her eyes welling with unshed tears that I was desperate to wipe away. I felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce urge to shield her from the wickedness of his words. It was like a switch flipped in me. I finally found my voice, though it wavered with the intensity of my emotion. "Greg, why don't you just get the hell out of here?" I shouted, stepping into the light. "You don't get to treat people like this. You don't get to talk to her like that." His gaze swung toward me, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw surprise flicker across his face, quickly replaced by that familiar smirk. "Oh, great. The little daughter wants to play hero. How cute. You think you can protect her?" Looking back, I realized that my attempt to defend my mom only fueled the fire. The confrontation escalated quickly, Greg hurling more insults, and I matching each one with words of my own. It felt like a scene out of a movie, raw and surreal, but it was very real to me. My mom stood to the side, looking devastated, a woman caught in the crossfire of a battle she never wanted to fight. Tension filled the air, a taut string ready to snap. Finally, Greg turned on his heel, a satisfied grin plastered across his face, as if he'd just crushed our spirits. "You think you can just play the victim, don't you? Good luck with that," he called back, his laughter ringing in my ears like a curse. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just about the insults thrown. It was the sheer disregard he had for my mother, an honorable woman who deserved respect, not disdain. The betrayal sank deeper than I could have imagined, it morphed into something darker. I felt it twist in my gut, a hunger for revenge. I retreated back into the house, my heart racing. I could feel my mom's eyes on me, a mix of empathy and concern. "Joanna, please don't let this get to you," she said softly, her voice shaky. But I couldn't help it. The anger and humiliation festered inside me like a relentless storm. That evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I sat on my bed, the weight of Greg's words echoing in my mind. I imagined the look on his face when I would make him regret ever crossing paths with my family. I began to formulate a plan, an intricate scheme that would turn the tables on him, that would remind him that words have consequences. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming our dignity. And I was going to show Greg that messing with my mom was the worst mistake he could have ever made. The fire inside me began to burn brighter, fueling the determination that would soon set my plan into motion. And so it began, the countdown to my revenge. The spark of injustice ignited it. The following weeks felt like a slow descent into chaos, each day amplifying the tension that hung in our neighborhood like dark clouds before a storm. Every time I saw Greg's face, the embarrassment and anger from that fateful day came rushing back. I could hardly focus on anything else, my entire world narrowed down to thoughts of revenge and how to reclaim our dignity. It started subtly. I would notice Greg glaring at my mom when he thought she wasn't looking, or muttering under his breath whenever she walked by. It was like he relished the power he had over her, a power I was determined to strip away. One afternoon, I caught him tossing his trash into our yard as he walked by, a smirk plastered across his face, as if to say, "What are you going to do about it?" I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about his verbal assault anymore, he was taunting us, and every act of defiance chipped away at my mom's spirit. She would come inside after an interaction with him, shoulders slumped, her smile a shadow of its former self. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of what he might do next, how far his cruelty would go. And then it happened, the final straw that ignited the fury burning inside me. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, the phone rang. My mom answered, her expression changing to one of confusion. I strained to hear her side of the conversation. "What do you mean, a noise complaint?" "No, we haven't been loud at all. Yes, I understand, but. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the local police. Greg had called in a complaint against us, claiming we threw rowdy parties that disrupted the peace. My mom's voice trembled as she pleaded her innocence, trying to explain how we were just a quiet family who had never caused any trouble. But I could see the defeat in her eyes as she hung up the phone. Greg was using the system against us, weaponizing his anger. The thought of him enjoying every moment of our distress pushed me over the edge. I felt like a volcano ready to erupt, and I needed to act. I began to outline my plan, a series of calculated moves that would flip the script on Greg. I decided to play a long game, one that would not only expose him but also embarrass him in front of the entire neighborhood. I began gathering intel on him, piecing together the puzzle of his life. I learned that he had a dog, a notoriously loud and obnoxious bulldog named Spike that seemed to have been bred for chaos. I watched as he would leave Spike outside for hours, the poor creature barking incessantly, disturbing the entire block. That's when inspiration struck. I quietly began to unsettle the foundations of Greg's carefully constructed facade. I'd go to the local dog park, making sure to mention to fellow dog owners how Greg's dog was a nuisance, how he was always barking and how Greg never seemed to care. It didn't take long for the whispers to spread through the neighborhood. Soon, I was hearing murmurs, people commenting on Greg's lack of responsibility as a pet owner. It gained momentum, a tiny snowball rolling down the hill, growing larger with each passing day. I could see the discontent in the eyes of our neighbors as they exchanged stories about Greg's dog in hushed tones. I also discreetly started documenting everything. I installed a few cameras around our home, capturing Greg's antics when he thought no one was watching. Videos of him yelling at Spike, cursing at the mailman, and even throwing trash onto our lawn. Every clip I collected added fuel to the fire of my plan. I knew I'd use that footage when the time was right, turning the neighborhood against him like he had tried to turn us against one another. But the situation escalated even further when Greg retaliated against my growing influence in the neighborhood. Suddenly, our driveway was no longer just a minor inconvenience, it became his focal point for drama. He called the city on us for zoning violations, claiming my mom's garden was an eyesore and a hazard. The doorbell rang one afternoon, and a city inspector stood on our porch, clipboard in hand, ready to critique my mother's pride and joy. "Your neighbor has filed a complaint about your garden," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I'm here to inspect it for potential violations." I felt the heat rise within me, ready to unleash. This wasn't just about my mom's garden anymore, it was an attack on her spirit, her happiness. I watched as the inspector walked through our yard, jotting down notes, and each click of his pen felt as though it was carving a deeper wound in my heart. The inspector was polite, but his demeanor was serious, and I could tell he was trying to remain impartial. My mom stood beside me, her face pale as she watched her beloved garden, a sanctuary she'd nurtured for years, come under scrutiny. As if sensing the tension, Greg leaned against his fence, arms crossed with a smug look on his face. I could see the satisfaction in his eyes, a gleam that said he had won. In that moment, everything crystallized for me. I felt a switch flip in my mind, a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I could no longer just sit back and let him tear my mother down. It was time to put my plan into immediate action, no more passive-aggressive tactics. This was about reclaiming our space and our peace of mind. The revenge I had been plotting was no longer a mere thought, it had morphed into a mission, and I was ready to fight for my mom, for our home. After the inspector left, I sat down at my laptop, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I crafted a detailed plan. The first step? Rallying support from our neighbors, those who were also fed up with Greg's antics. I knew they existed. I had overheard enough conversations at the dog park and during grocery runs to realize I wasn't alone in my disdain for his behavior. I created a private group on social media, inviting those who'd shared their frustrations about Greg. It was a small yet significant step, but the reactions were immediate and overwhelming. Soon the group was filling up with messages of support, people sharing their own stories about how Greg had mistreated them or their property. I could feel the energy building, and it fueled my determination. Next, I gathered the evidence I had collected over the weeks, videos of Greg's dog barking incessantly, clips of him arguing with neighbors, fighting with the mailman, and even littering. I was building a case, a digital dossier of sorts, to present to everyone who would listen. I wanted to expose him for who he really was, a bully hiding behind a facade of authority, and I was going to make sure he was held accountable. It was during one particularly heated neighborhood meeting that my plan reached its peak. The topic arose about Greg's complaints against various families, and I saw my opportunity. I stepped up, shaking with adrenaline but resolved. "I have something to share," I announced, grabbing everyone's attention. As I played the clips from my phone, there was a palpable shift in the room. Gasps filled the air as my neighbors watched Greg's outbursts, his disregard for property lines, and the chaos he unleashed on all of us. I saw heads nodding, expressions changing from disbelief to anger. I took a deep breath, trying to harness the nervous energy swirling inside me. "Greg has been bullying us for too long," I asserted, my voice steady, emboldened by the support of everyone around me. "He's been using petty complaints to scare us and control us, but we are stronger than that. We need to stand together. Let's show him that we refuse to be intimidated anymore." It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. The moment I finished speaking, a wave of murmurs swept through the room. Neighbors began to nod and share their own experiences, each story adding fuel to a fire I'd started. A few brave souls even spoke up, echoing my sentiments. He made a comment about my garden too. "I caught him throwing trash into my yard last month. My kids are afraid to play outside because of his dog." It felt like the dam had finally burst, and in that moment, I could see the shift in momentum. Greg was no longer the untouchable bully, he was becoming the neighborhood pariah. And then, I saw him, standing at the back of the room, his face a mask of rage as he clutched the doorframe. The realization hit me like a shockwave. I had turned the tide. The power was slipping from his grasp, and he was losing control. In that instant, I knew this was just the beginning. I had ignited a movement, a coalition of neighbors united against one man's cruelty. I was determined to ensure that Greg would not only regret the words he had hurled at my mother but also the way he treated every single one of us. As we concluded the meeting, I felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had found my purpose in this fight, my pursuit of justice for my mom and our community. The fear that had once gripped me now transformed into a fierce resolve. The next phase of my plan was already forming in my mind, my strategy evolving with as the meeting adjourned. I felt a surge of adrenaline and a sense of clarity wash over me. It was no longer just about my mom and her dignity, it was about sending a message to Greg and reclaiming our sense of community. I had ignited a spark, and now it was time to fan it into a roaring fire. My plan had several key components, each carefully structured to ensure maximum impact. I wanted to make Greg feel the consequences of his actions, not just from my family but from the entire neighborhood. Here's how I mapped it out. 1. Building a coalition. The first step was to solidify the support I had gained during the meeting. I reached out to my neighbors and proposed regular gatherings where we could share our stories and devise strategies to confront Greg together. Each week, we would meet in someone's backyard, sharing snacks and support while tightening our bond. I made it a point to remind everyone how powerful we could be when united, transforming our individual grievances into a collective roar. 2. Documenting everything. I continued to gather evidence of Greg's behavior. I set up cameras strategically around our properties, capturing not just his outbursts but also Spike's incessant barking and the chaos that seemed to follow him wherever he went. I encouraged my neighbors to do the same, recording their own interactions with Greg and his dog. The more footage we collected, the stronger our case became. It was crucial to show that Greg wasn't just targeting us but was a nuisance to the entire neighborhood. 3. Public awareness. Next, I created a neighborhood newsletter, the kind that would normally highlight community events and families' accomplishments. However, I decided to leverage this platform to inform everyone about Greg's ongoing antics. I crafted a special column titled Neighborhood Watch, where I would share not only the genuine community news but also updates on our fight against Greg. I included snippets of our gathered video evidence, anecdotes from various neighbors, and encouraged others to join us at future meetings. The goal was to ensure that everyone knew he wasn't just a local nuisance but a serious problem that needed addressing. 4. Rallying for support, after establishing our community newsletter, I organized a neighborhood block party, an event designed to celebrate our unity while highlighting the need to stand against Greg. I invited everyone, emphasizing that it would be a chance for neighbors to connect, share stories, and voice their concerns. My goal was to create an atmosphere of solidarity that would put pressure on Greg and show him he could no longer operate without accountability. 5. Further heightening tensions, during the block party, I intended to have a few key speakers, people who had endured Greg's bullying firsthand. I encouraged them to share their stories openly in front of the group, amplifying the message that we wouldn't allow his behavior to go unchecked. I envisioned a moment when the collective voice of our community would echo in defiance against Greg, drowning out his taunts. I wanted him to realize that he was outnumbered, and the tide had turned. 6. Writing a letter. After the block party, I wanted to take a more formal approach. With the backing of my neighbors, I planned to draft a letter addressed directly to Greg. In it, we would outline our collective grievances, the events leading up to this point, and the community's expectations moving forward. This letter would serve as an official warning, articulating that his actions had consequences, and if he continued down the path of harassment, we would be forced to elevate matters to local authorities. 7. Escalating to local authorities. Should Greg choose to respond with hostility or continue his behavior without consequence, my plan included enlisting the help of local law enforcement. With ample evidence of his verbal abuse, noise complaints regarding Spike, and our documented experiences, I would propose that we file a formal complaint against him. If necessary, we could even explore the avenue of a restraining order, demonstrating our commitment to protecting ourselves and our families from his aggression. 8. Public awareness campaign. I envisioned one final act that would make it impossible for Greg to escape the repercussions of his actions. I wanted to organize a small rally outside the city council building, inviting local media to cover our story. It would serve as a public demonstration of our solidarity and determination while shining a light on Greg's behavior. I could already picture the news reports, my fellow neighbors standing alongside me, united in our demand for respect and accountability. We would no longer be victims, we would be a force for change. 9. Personal face-off. As a final touch, I planned to have a personal confrontation with Greg. I envisioned a moment when he would feel completely isolated, standing alone as the neighborhood rallied behind me. I would approach him calmly, armed with evidence, and the day of the block party arrived, and the air buzzed with anticipation. I had never been more nervous in my life, but also fiercely determined. The community had rallied behind my vision, and we had transformed the backyard of one of the more outspoken neighbors into a lively gathering filled with food, laughter, and a sense of unity that had been missing for so long. Colorful banners flapped in the breeze, and the smell of grilled burgers mixed with the sweet scent of lemonade, creating an atmosphere brimming with positivity. But lurking underneath it all was the tension of knowing Greg would likely show up. He always did, eager to assert his dominance. I didn't want to think about how he'd react to the gathering or the fact that we'd all come together to stand against him. For weeks, I had rehearsed this confrontation in my head, preparing myself for the showdown that felt inevitable. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting soft golden rays over the party, I saw Greg approaching. He strutted over, his posture radiating arrogance, his bulldog Spike at his heels. The gleeful chatter faded momentarily as he stepped into our midst, a dark cloud on an otherwise clear day. My heart raced as I locked eyes with him, feeling the collective tension in the air. "Wow, what a pathetic gathering," he sneered, looking around at the laughing families and children playing. "Are you all really this desperate for attention?" "Sad." The crowd tensed, his words cutting through the light-hearted atmosphere like a knife. But I felt my resolve harden. I couldn't let him intimidate us. I stepped forward, taking a deep breath as I prepared to confront him. "Greg, this is about more than just a social gathering. It's about standing up against bullying," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "You've harassed my mom and made this neighborhood hostile for so many of us. We refuse to let you get away with it any longer." Laughter faded to silence, and I could feel the collective energy shift as my neighbors began to gather behind me. Greg's smug expression faltered slightly, and that made me bolder. "You think you can bully us into silence, but we're done being quiet," I continued, my voice rising with conviction. We're here to show you that we're united, and we won't let you tear us apart anymore. Greg's eyes narrowed, and I could see the anger boiling within him. You think you're all so clever, don't you? He spat, stepping closer. This little charade won't change anything. You're nothing but a bunch of losers crying for attention. You think you can take me down? I swallowed hard but pressed on. You underestimate the power of community, Greg. Together, we're stronger than you'll ever be. In that moment, I saw the shift in my neighbors. Heads nodded in solidarity, their expressions shifting from fear to empowerment as they stood with me. One neighbor, an elderly woman who had kept quiet for far too long, stepped up beside me. We're tired of your behavior, Greg. It's time you realize that we won't tolerate your bullying any longer. The crowd began to murmur in agreement, emboldened by the shared sentiments of frustration. I could feel the energy rising, a unifying force pushing back against Greg. The tide was turning. Greg's demeanor darkened, and his bravado began to crack under the weight of our collective strength. You think you can just come together and intimidate me? He barked, looking around for support, but found none. You all don't know what you're messing with. That's when I decided to leap into action. I produced the letter we had drafted together, filled with the collective experiences of my neighbors, along with the evidence we had gathered. We're not just voicing our grievances, we're standing here letting you know we have documented everything you've done. With trembling hands, I held up the papers, the weight of countless stories of fear, anger, and hurt, translating into tangible proof of his reign of terror. I continued, we're not afraid to take this to the authorities. You've crossed a line, and it ends here. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in Greg's eyes, the bravado slipping from his grasp. This is ridiculous, he shouted, trying to regain control of the conversation, but the energy around him was shifting. We're not here to argue anymore, I declared, feeling the thrill of empowerment surging through me. We're here to take our neighborhood back. The crowd erupted into applause, a wave of hope washing over us. The power of community was palpable, and suddenly Greg looking back, it's surreal to think about how that one confrontation changed everything. The energy at the block party was electric, the roar of our united voices drowned out Greg's attempts to regain control. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that we could reclaim our neighborhood from his grasp. Greg's reaction was as explosive as I had feared. With the crowd against him, he sputtered a few more insults, but they fell flat in the face of our collective resolve. As he stormed off, I could see the realization dawning on his face, this wasn't just a petty brawl anymore, it was a full-blown revolt. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect of that day became evident. Word of the block party and our united front spread throughout the neighborhood. My neighbors began coming together more than ever, hosting potlucks and gatherings, sharing laughter and stories we hadn't exchanged before. The sense of community that had been slowly eroding was being rebuilt, brick by brick, laughter by laughter. But Greg wasn't willing to take his defeat lying down. He retaliated, of course, attempting to vilify me and my family to anyone who would listen. He spread rumors, claiming that we were the real troublemakers, that our noise complaints were fabricated, and that we were trying to bully him out of his own home. I knew he thrived on chaos, and it was almost predictable how he'd act. Yet, with the support of my neighbors, it didn't matter as much as it once had. We organized a neighborhood watch, a simple yet effective means to keep an eye on each other and address any further tumult. I even reached out to the local police, who were surprisingly supportive after hearing our accounts. It felt liberating, knowing we had resources to back us up if needed. It wasn't long before they began patrolling the area more frequently, just a simple presence was enough to deter Greg from his antics. As time went on, the tension between us simmered down, but the scars from the ordeal remained. Greg would still glare at us from his porch, attempting to assert his dominance with nasty looks, but they no longer held any power. Each time I saw him scowling, I felt a thrill of victory surge through me. I was reminded that my actions had made a difference. The collective strength of our neighborhood had put an end to his reign of bullying. Then came the day of reckoning. We had invited the local news to cover our communal efforts to reclaim our neighborhood. I stood there, proud as I watched my neighbors recount their experiences and share stories of how we had come together. The piece aired just before the evening news, and what followed was a wave of support from others in the community who faced similar struggles. However, I never expected Greg's reaction. He came over that evening, furious as ever, demanding to know why we put him in such a negative light. It was surreal to see him so unhinged, so desperate. "You think this is over?" he spat, face red with rage. I stood my ground. "It was never about being over, Greg. It's about understanding that we won't let you bully us anymore. Your actions have consequences, and we're just getting started." With that, I turned my back on him, feeling the solidarity of my neighbors behind me. The sense of closure was palpable. For all his threats and bluster, he had lost the power he once wielded so effortlessly. Months passed, and slowly, Greg faded into the background of our neighborhood's dynamic. He still lived there, but his presence was muted. He learned the hard way that the community wouldn't tolerate his behavior any longer. It was during one of our neighborhood gatherings, where the laughter rang out like music, that it hit me: we had transformed. The community once splintered by fear was stronger than ever, forged in the fires of conflict. Yet, as I sat back, watching my mom laugh with neighbors she had never really talked to before, a deeper thought lingered in my mind. Revenge had given way to something more profound, a sense of belonging, unity, and understanding that comes only when we're willing to fight for each other. But at what cost? Did it change my relationship with Greg? Did it change me? I pondered the complexities of human nature and how revenge can ignite a fire, but it can also illuminate the path to healing. In reclaiming our neighborhood, I had also learned the true power of compassion and community support. As I gazed at the joy surrounding me, I realized that sometimes, it's not the act of revenge that defines our journey, but rather the lessons we learn along the way. I would forever treasure the strength of my neighbors, the resilience of The echo of the cafeteria buzzed around me, a cacophony of laughter and casual chatter that felt like a distant storm, an unsettling backdrop to the reality I was drowning in. I sat at a corner table, the smell of greasy pizza and stale fries wafting through the air, clinging to my skin like a fog I couldn't shake off. It was just another ordinary lunch hour, yet my heart was racing, a drumroll for the chaos that was about to unfold. I wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. The palpable tension had settled over our small school like a thick fog, thick enough to choke out even the brightest of smiles. My friends, Clara, with her wild curls and infectious laughter, and Mia, who could turn any dull moment into an adventure, seemed to sense the dark cloud looming. They shot concerned glances my way, but I kept my head down, a shield against their worry. Today, the stakes felt higher than ever, and it wasn't just me, it was all of us. A month ago, the principal, Mr. Thompson, had clapped his hands together, disrupting the usual drone of adolescent noise. "We need to talk about grades," he'd said, his voice booming like thunder. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over our class, landing like a predator on its prey. He had laid out an ultimatum: shape up or lose our honors program. It didn't just threaten our GPA, it threatened our futures, our dreams of college, and the hard work we'd poured into our education. The very foundation of who we were as students was being yanked out from under us. That day, he had called me out directly. "You think your grades will earn you a spot in that fancy university?" His words sliced through the air, sharp and mocking. In front of everyone. The laughter that followed felt like hot embers on my skin, each chuckle igniting a fire of humiliation that threatened to consume me. I had always been the model student, the one who strived to do everything right. But in that moment, I felt like a failure, exposed and vulnerable. And then there were the teachers, who seemed to have turned into Mr. Thompson's pawns, enforcing his whims with a frightening zeal. Mrs. Green, my math teacher, once my biggest supporter, now treated me with a clipped impatience, as if my mere presence was an affront to her authority. Every time she called me out in class, it was another jab at my confidence, each word coating my dreams in a bitter layer of doubt. They thought they held all the power, Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Green, and the other enforcers of this cruel game, but they didn't know me. They didn't know that beneath my anxious exterior simmered a fire that roared with a quiet intensity. Threatening my education? They'd soon find out it wasn't just students they could play with. With each passing day, the shadows of revenge danced in my mind. I had never considered myself vengeful, But when the very essence of my future was put on the line, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them push me around. No, I would show them the consequences of their actions. A reckoning was brewing, and as I glanced down at my untouched lunch, I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest, the anticipation of what was to come curling like smoke in the air around me. Little did they know, their jobs would soon become collateral damage in my quest for justice. The first crack in the facade appeared a week after Mr. Thompson's proclamation. I had stayed late to study, hoping that drowning myself in textbooks would somehow drown out the chaos of my thoughts. As I packed my bag, I overheard hushed voices drifting from the staff lounge, their tones conspiratorial, laced with disdain. "Can you believe some of these kids? They think they can just coast through this program," Mrs. Green said, her voice harsh and judgmental. "They need a wake-up call." "A little tough love never hurt anyone," Mr. Thompson shot back, his tone dripping with derision. "If we don't crack down now, we might as well hand them their diplomas on a silver platter. It's not like they've earned it." My heart sank. Anger flared in my chest, burning like acid. Tough love? This was punishment veiled as education, a cruel mockery of what teaching should be. I felt the deep stab of disbelief. How could they be so blind to the effort we put in? I thought back to the nights I spent hunched over my desk, fighting exhaustion to finish assignments, and the weekends that slid by while my peers partied. Confusion began to twist my emotions into a tight knot. Was I really the failure they painted me to be? Had my peers, the ones who shared laughter and stress, secretly conspired with them to undermine me? The thought twisted like a knife in my gut. How could they judge my commitment when they didn't see the sacrifices I made? Over the next few weeks, the changes in the classroom became glaringly apparent. The atmosphere morphed from one of camaraderie to an oppressive battlefield. I watched as my classmates' faces drained of color, their shoulders slumping under the weight of mounting stress. One by one, they ceased to be the spirited friends I loved, they transformed into shadows of themselves, each defeated glance mirroring my own. When I struggled with a math problem in front of the class and Mrs. Green blasted me for wasting everyone's time, the laughter that erupted felt like the final straw. I could feel their eyes on me, not with support but with judgment. I wanted to scream, to shake them all out of their stupor and demand they see me, the real me, the one who fought tooth and nail to be where I was. Why couldn't they see that I was trying? My anger morphed into resentment, bubbling beneath the surface as I began to see them for what they truly were, obstacles to my future. As I watched Mr. Thompson and the teachers push us harder, laying down more draconian rules, I felt a swelling rage rise up within me, a tide ready to engulf everything in its path. They were the ones who betrayed us. They had taken an institution meant to foster growth and turned it into a prison of despair. My dreams were being suffocated under their heavy-handed policies, and I'd be damned if I let them go unpunished. I found myself daydreaming about revenge at the most mundane moments, while washing the dishes, during a dull history lecture, or even as I lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling. The more trapped I felt, the more vivid these fantasies became. What would happen if I exposed their hypocrisy? What if I recorded their conversations, painted them as tyrants in the eyes of the school board? These thoughts swirled around in my mind like a whirlwind, enticing and terrifying all at once. One afternoon, while I was sifting through my notes in the library, I heard someone near my table. Their snickers echoed like a haunting melody, twisting deeper into my gut as I recognized the voices. It was Jake and Sarah, two of the more popular kids in school, who'd given in to the atmosphere of dread that was suffocating us all. As I peeked over my textbook, I caught a glimpse of them huddled together, their whispers like venom in the air. "Did you see how she bombed that math test?" "Total embarrassment," Jake said, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Yeah, I can't believe she thought she'd get into college like that." "Maybe they should just lower the bar for everyone," Sarah chuckled, her laughter sharp. I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me, a crushing weight that threatened to pull me under. How had it come to this? My education, the very thing I had poured my heart and soul into, was now fodder for their ridicule. I pressed my palms against the table, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The isolation closed in around me, a suffocating blanket that wrapped tighter with each word they uttered. As the days turned into weeks, that isolation deepened. Clara and Mia had started to drift, caught in the web of their own insecurities. It hurt to see them pulled away, as if they were being pulled into the depths of the very system that was crushing me. They'd throw me sympathetic glances, but their words were scarce. It was as if they were afraid of catching the fallout of my troubles, and their silence spoke volumes. I felt the distance growing, a chasm widening between us, and it gnawed at my heart like a relentless predator. The final blow came one dreary Friday afternoon. I had been struggling with a project for weeks, pouring all my energy into crafting something that would finally earn me a glimmer of respect from Mrs. Green. She had promised feedback, a moment of hope amidst the rising tides of despair. But when I nervously approached her desk, my project cradled in my trembling hands, her eyes flicked over it dismissively. "Is this the best you can do, Emily?" she asked, her voice cool and cutting, filled with the kind of disappointment that felt like nails on a chalkboard. "You really thought this was sufficient for our standards?" I had barely begun to respond when she added, "Maybe you should consider a different path if this level of work is what you produce." The laughter of my peers bubbled up again, a cruel chorus that sang of my failures. I felt the heat of tears welling up in my eyes but refused to let them spill over. I turned on my heel, fighting the urge to break down, feeling the weight of her words crushing my spirit. It wasn't just humiliation, it was a shattering of trust. Trust in the system, trust in myself, and trust in those who claimed to support us. That evening, I lay in bed, the ceiling blurring beneath a haze of anger and hopelessness. I replayed the day's events over and over. Each time, it felt like a punch to the gut. I had only wanted to prove myself, yet they had turned my ambition into a weapon against me, wielded by those I had once admired. It felt so grotesquely unfair. My heart raced as I plotted my course of action. I would not be crushed without a fight. I began to research ways to expose the hypocrisy of our educational leaders. I imagined recording their conversations, collecting evidence of their callousness. There had to be a way to turn the night drag drearily on, my mind racing like a runaway train filled with anger, despair, and a deep, burning desire for justice. The buzz of the harsh fluorescent light above my bed felt like a spotlight on my turmoil, illuminating the depths of my frustration. Just as I sat up, clutching my pillow and staring into the void of my darkened room, an impulsive thought seized me, electrifying my senses. What if I turned the tables? What if I used their own tactics against them? The idea flashed in my mind like a lightning strike, igniting a smoldering fire that had been hidden beneath my surface. I could record them. I could expose them. The thought sent shivers down my spine, both exhilarating and terrifying. In that moment, clarity washed over me like a tidal wave, sweeping away the debris of doubt and fear that had weighed me down for weeks. I wasn't just an anxious student anymore, I was a fighter, an unexpected warrior ready to battle for my future. They had underestimated me, but I would orchestrate a plan that would lay bare their hypocrisy and cruelty for all to see. I envisioned gathering my classmates, rallying them with the truth of our shared struggle. They needed to know they were not alone, that our fight was collective. But first, I had to gather the ammunition. I needed to be careful, stealthy, like a hunter stalking its prey. My heart raced with a mix of fear and adrenaline as I began to imagine how this could unfold. The next day, I entered school with a newfound resolve. My usual trepidation was replaced by a sense of purpose, each step echoing with the weight of my decision. I took my seat in math class, and as Mrs. Green began her lecture, my mind whirred with possibilities. My phone, innocuous and unassuming in my pocket, became my secret weapon. I could record her, capture her disdain on video, the moments she belittled us, the times she chastised us publicly. If I could catch her in action, it would be the evidence needed to bring her down. But that wasn't enough. I had to consider Mr. Thompson, whose grand schemes threatened not just my education but the futures of all my peers. He was the puppeteer pulling the strings, and I vowed to unveil the strings for everyone to see. I would document his arrogance, his condescension, those moments when he spoke to us as if we were mere cockroaches beneath his boot. As I plotted my revenge, the memory of Clara and Mia tugged at my conscience, reminding me of the loyalty we once shared. I had to include them, they deserved to be part of the reckoning. I began drafting a message in my mind, an invitation for them to rally together. We had been through so much, and if we had each other's backs, we would be unstoppable. But the final straw came later that week, as I sat in the library, my laptop open to a blank document. I was supposed to be working on an assignment, but my heart wasn't in it. Instead, I eavesdropped on a discussion between Mr. Thompson and another teacher, their laughter echoing down the aisles like shards of glass. "I swear, they're all just lazy," Mr. Thompson said, his voice thick with disdain. "A little pressure is good for them, some motivation. They'll thank us later. Or not," he added with a dismissive chuckle, "but it won't matter when they're failing." Something snapped inside me. Their laughter, as I sat on the wooden library chair, heart racing and fists clenched, I realized I had to act swiftly and decisively. The vision of vengeance crystallized into a step-by-step plan, pulsating with a sense of urgency. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every student they had belittled, every dream they had trampled on. I would turn their power against them and expose their hypocrisy. Here's how it would unfold. My first task was to capture evidence of their cruel tactics and attitudes. If I was going to expose the administrators, I needed their own words as weapons. I started taking my phone to classes, discreetly recording snippets of Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Green's lectures, particularly when they called out students in cutting tones or mocked our efforts, potential obstacles. I needed to remain undetected. Any hint of suspicion and they would tighten their grip on us even more. I had to keep my phone discreetly positioned on my lap, using Bluetooth headphones to listen while maintaining the illusion of paying attention. I also had to avoid drawing the attention of fellow students who might be alarmed by my actions. With a collection of recordings and a passion ignited in my heart, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to Clara and Mia, piecing together our shared frustrations and fears. I asked them to join me in collecting their own evidence, encouraging them to document their experiences, too. How I did it, I set up a secret group chat, sharing my plan and urging them to record their interactions with teachers or any moments of humiliation. "We're not alone in this," I texted them, "and together we can make a difference." Potential obstacles, trust was fragile. Clara and Mia hesitated, fearing repercussions. I had to reassure them that this wasn't just about revenge, it was about standing up for what was right. I filled them with a sense of justice, painting our shared experience into a rallying cry. With enough evidence from our recordings, I decided it was time to compile everything into a cohesive document. I began categorizing the clips, instances of bullying, mockery, and disdainful remarks that painted a clear picture of the toxic environment. I even began drafting a letter addressed to the school board, outlining our experiences and the detrimental impact of their actions on students' mental health and education. Potential obstacles, I had to ensure everything was factual, avoiding exaggeration. I knew the school administration would scrutinize our claims, looking for any signs of dishonesty. I had to maintain integrity while presenting our case. As I began to build a compelling case, I realized that I needed more support. My classmates were the heart of this movement. I reached out to them in secret, organizing a meeting in the back of the library under the pretense of studying for exams. How I did it, I spread the word through whispers, careful not to include anyone I didn't trust. The day of the meeting, I stood before a small group of classmates, sharing my vision and showing them my recordings. "We have the power to change this," I exclaimed, my voice trembling with excitement. "We can show them they can't treat us this way anymore." Potential obstacles. The day had finally arrived. My heart raced as the school's auditorium loomed before me, a cavernous space filled with rows of students and faculty. The anticipation hung in the air like a charged storm, crackling with tension. Today, I would unveil the truth, no more hiding, no more silence. Clara and Mia stood by my side, their expressions a mix of anxiety and fierce determination, mirroring my own resolve. We had spent countless hours crafting our presentation, piecing together our recordings into a razor-sharp narrative that exposed the callousness of Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Green. The entire student body buzzed with curiosity, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. The lights dimmed, and the spotlight cut across the crowd, landing on us like an omen. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, the microphone feeling foreign in my hand. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice steady but my heart hammering in my chest. We wanted to talk about something that's affecting all of us, the culture of fear and humiliation pervading our school. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I caught sight of Mr. Thompson sitting at the front, the corners of his mouth twitching in irritation. His disapproval was palpable, a storm cloud ready to unleash its fury. I pressed on, flipping open my laptop to reveal our meticulously edited video. The first clip played, a recording of Mr. Thompson laughing derisively at a student who had dared to voice her concerns about the pressure we were under. The laughter echoed around the auditorium, but it was laced with unease, an insidious reminder of the power dynamics at play. I glanced at Clara and Mia, who nodded, their resolve fueling my own. The next clip showed Mrs. Green, her sharp tongue cutting through a nervous student's explanation of his project. "This is completely unacceptable," she scoffed, her voice tripping with sarcasm. "You're representing our school, not your personal comedy show." Gasps filled the room. The tide was turning, and I could see it in the faces of my classmates: shock, disbelief, and an awakening sense of solidarity. They were starting to realize that they weren't alone all along. We were all victims of a system that thrived on intimidation and ridicule. As we moved through our evidence, I felt the weight of their gazes piercing through me, a collective force that fueled my courage. I could see Mr. Thompson's jaw tightening, his expression morphing from amusement to indignation. He was losing control, and it felt intoxicating. The final clip loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. It was a recording of my private confrontation with Mrs. Green, the moment when she had dismissed my efforts as insufficient and hinted that I should consider a different path. I could hear my own voice trembling but resolute. "This isn't about giving up. It's about fighting for what we deserve." The playback echoed through the auditorium, and the silence that followed was deafening. The weight of my words hung in the air, a challenge thrown at the feet of authority. I saw Mrs. Green's face turn from irritation to disbelief. She couldn't comprehend that a student had dared to stand against her. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. Students shifted in their seats, murmurs of agreement fluttering like wings. My classmates were no longer passive observers, they were awakening from a slumber of despondency. I felt an electric current surge through the crowd, a collective heartbeat growing stronger. "I don't want to be belittled." The auditorium erupted into chaos. Students rose from their seats, a wave of disbelief and outrage crashing over the stagnant atmosphere that had swallowed us for so long. I could hear the murmurs of agreement, the shouts of defiance growing louder, like a battle cry echoing deep within the walls of the school. And there, in the front row, Mr. Thompson was no longer the towering figure of authority. He was a cornered animal, glaring at us with palpable fury and confusion. Clara and Mia squeezed my hands, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhilaration. We had done it. We had dared to stand up, to fight back, and suddenly, we were not just individuals trapped in a toxic system, we were part of a movement. As the crowd grew restless, I could feel the tide turning against our oppressors. Students began chanting, "Enough is enough." The sounds bounced off the walls, filling the space with a power that was intoxicating. I had never felt more alive, more connected to my peers. It was a moment of collective empowerment, the realization that we were not alone in our struggles. But with the cheers came consequences. In the days that followed, the fallout from our rebellion was swift and severe. Mr. Thompson, in a desperate attempt to retain control, called an all-staff meeting that resulted in a palpable tension hanging over the school. Teachers who had once been supportive now cast wary glances in the hallways, unsure of where their loyalty should lie. Whispers of retaliation swirled around us like storm clouds, tainting the air with the scent of fear. Mrs. Green, particularly enraged by our insubordination, took it upon herself to make an example of us. She began to nitpick at our assignments, handing back graded papers with scathing comments that felt more personal than constructive. The high marks we had once been accustomed to became a distant memory, replaced by grades that seemed to reflect her contempt rather than our efforts. Clara and Mia struggled to cope with the fallout, their spirits dimming under the weight of the backlash. I watched helplessly as they withdrew into themselves, their laughter fading into whispers of doubt. "Maybe we went too far," Clara said one evening over a bowl of popcorn, her brow furrowing with worry. "I mean, what if this really affects our college applications?" I felt a pang of guilt pierce through my resolve. Was it worth the price we were paying? Were we really fighting for freedom, or had we simply unleashed chaos? But the shadow of my own dreams haunted me, a constant reminder that our rebellion was fueled by a deep desire for justice, a longing to reclaim our education from the clutches of ignorance. The final blow came when we received an email from the school board announcing a review of the honors program. The letter was a chilling reminder that our actions had consequences. It accused us of disruptive behavior and hinted at the potential for the program to be restructured entirely. It was as if we had unleashed a storm that threatened to uproot everything we had fought for. In a fleeting moment of darkness, I felt the weight of regret pressing down on my chest. Had our fight truly been worth it? My heart raced as I considered the very real possibility of losing the futures we had fought so hard to protect. Were we just pawns in a game that would forever alter the course of our education? But then, one afternoon, amid the lingering doubt and tension, my phone pinged with a new message. It was Mia, her typically bright emoji replaced with a resolute determination. We need to keep. I never thought I'd find myself in a position where I'd be plotting out revenge like some twisted character in a movie. But here I am, fingers trembling as I type this confession, wondering if I'm the villain in my own story. The sun had just begun to set beyond the skyline of our city, casting long shadows that stretched across my living room floor, and it made everything feel a bit more ominous. My small group of friends and I were all bound by the same invisible thread, our insatiable desire for laughter and camaraderie. There was Sophie, a fierce redhead with a laugh that could shatter glass, Ethan, goofy and tall, who always seemed to have the perfect one-liner to lighten the mood, and then there was Maya, a shy but clever soul who could weave magic with words. Together, we formed our own little sanctuary, a bubble against the chaos of the world outside, until Ryan invaded our space. Ryan, with his perfectly tousled hair and self-satisfied smirk, was a force of chaos. The kind of guy who thrives on belittling others, his every word dripped with condescension. You know the type, he'd throw out a cutting remark with a casual laugh, as if it were all just a game. I can still picture that day in the coffee shop, the air thick with a rich scent of roasted beans, as he leaned back, arms crossed, and ridiculed Sophie's art project for an upcoming exhibition. The laughter from his circle echoed like a cruel chant, fueling his ego while leaving our fragile selves bruised and silent. What hurt the most wasn't just the words but the companionship that fell apart under their weight. It was watching the sparkle in my friends' eyes dim, their laughter turning hollow. I felt this simmering anger coiling inside me, a warmth that turned icy as I watched them suffer at the hands of this prick. There was an urge within me, a whisper that spoke of justice, but I never expected it to escalate to the level it would. Our group made a pact that day, silent yet palpable. Maybe we couldn't confront Ryan directly, after all, he thrived on confrontation, but we could fight back in our own way. I don't know when the idea fully formed in my mind, but it was as if a dark cloud began to roll in, obscuring the bright sky of my conscience. We started sending him those ridiculous Diarrhea audio clips, and with each one, it felt a little more satisfying, like a wicked game we were all playing. But as the months went by, the laughter soon shifted. What began as an innocent means of reclaiming our power morphed into something darker. I could feel the weight of our shared secret pressing down on my chest, a secret that thrived in the shadows of our friendship, threatening to spill over into something truly vile. I now realize that revenge has a way of twisting itself, much like the chaos Ryan had unleashed upon us, and I was about to learn just how tangled it could become. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the thrill of our little rebellion transformed. I had thought the audio clips would be a harmless prank, a way to trickle revenge into Ryan's arrogant life without directly confronting him. But the more I watched my friends react, Sophie's contained giggles turning into full-blown laughter, Ethan's dramatic reenactments of Ryan's bewildered expressions, the more I could feel it morphing into something toxic. But nothing could have prepared me for the night everything unraveled. We were hanging out in my living room, laughter spilling over as we prepared to send Ryan yet another clip. The room was filled with the aroma of popcorn, and the soft glow from the fairy lights danced around us like ethereal fireflies. But the mood shifted when Maya paused, her eyes darting nervously to the floor. "Are we really doing this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible amidst the chaos. The question hung there, heavy and oppressive, and I could see the unease etched across her face. What's the harm? I shot back, the defensiveness creeping into my voice. He deserves it. He made Sophie cry. Sophie's laughter stilled, replaced by a wrinkled brow of concern. But is this who we want to be? Do we really want to stoop to his level? I felt a stab of irritation at her hesitation. It felt unjust, as if she were undermining the bond we were forging against our common enemy. The inner turmoil began to churn. But what if we don't respond? What if we just let him win? I countered, trying to mask my growing uncertainty with bravado. But her eyes were wide, searching. Then, that night, a text came through. It was from Ryan, and my heart sank upon reading it. Wow, you losers think you can get to me with your childish pranks? I feel sorry for you. Keep it coming, it only proves how pathetic you all are. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I could hear Ryan's laugh in my mind, the very sound that had driven us to this point, ringing in my ears with renewed force. Confusion and disbelief washed over me. Didn't he see how much we were hurting? Didn't he realize that he was the reason we had resorted to this misery? But then, I felt the anger seeping back in, igniting like a match struck against gasoline. I remembered the scorn in his voice, the way he'd so easily dismantled Sophie's passion as if it were nothing more than a school project. It's not childish, it's just revenge, I muttered under my breath, but even I could hear the unconvincing tremor in my voice, like a child defending a lie. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and sent Ryan a particularly crude audio clip. The laughter from my friends washed over me, a wave of temporary relief drowning out my doubt. But then came the silence. The realization that I was no longer just a bystander in this twisted game. I had crossed the line, and it terrified me. As the days blurred together, I found myself scrolling through my messages, searching for any sign of regret in Ryan's responses, but it never came. I could practically feel him smirking, his confidence seemingly unshaken. I began to suspect that maybe he had seen this whole exchange as a joke, a game to keep him entertained. My inner turmoil turned into a festering wound that refused to heal. I could see the toll our revenge had begun to take on my friends. Sophie's laughter dimmed, replaced with a cloud of uncertainty that lingered in her eyes. Ethan, ever the joker, adopted a tense bravado, throwing out jokes that felt more like desperate attempts to lighten the growing heaviness in our group. And then there was Maya, the kind-hearted girl who once effortlessly filled our conversations with clever insights. She drew further away, her silence speaking volumes as she retreated into herself. Every time I glanced at our group chat, the glee we'd once shared felt laced with an uncomfortable undercurrent. Our initial sense of empowerment started to morph into paranoia. The more we sent those clips, the more I felt the need to justify our actions to myself. I would replay the sound of Ryan's disdain in my head, willingly choosing to believe that our revenge was righteous, but the doubt kept creeping back in. And then came the day. It was a dreary Wednesday, the kind of day that felt heavy even before it began. I had barely settled into my morning routine when I received a slew of notifications. My heart raced as I opened them one by one, only to find screenshots of Ryan's latest social media post. Tagging our small group, he had taken to his followers, calling us the Diarrhea Squad, complete with a compilation of our audio clips and a caption that read, "When your friends have no real talent, they resort to low blows. Keep it coming, losers." Sweat pooled in my palms as I could feel my face flush with embarrassment. The humiliation washed over me like a cold wave, freezing me in place. He had turned our attempts at revenge into a spectacle. My eyes darted around the room, half expecting my friends to appear and laugh it off, as if everything was fine. But when I glanced at the group chat, the atmosphere was thick with shame. Maya was the first to respond, "This isn't right. We shouldn't be dragging this on." Sophie chimed in shortly after with a nervous "This isn't what I signed up for." Ethan, trying to diffuse the tension, threw in a half-hearted joke, "Hey, at least we got a cool nickname. Diarrhea Squad sounds like a band." But even he couldn't mask the gravity of the situation. As the nagging sensation of betrayal began to seep through me, I felt an isolation settle in. The friends I thought I could count on were now looking to distance themselves from the mess we had created. My own sense of righteousness began to crumble under the weight of my shame, leaving me feeling raw and exposed. I could feel my isolation deepening as I realized that I was the architect of this nightmare, the villain in our story, and my friends were already plotting their escape route. The next few days were a blur. I watched my friends withdraw, their texts growing sporadic, each message laden with uncertainty. I could sense their judgment hanging in the air when I suggested sending one more clip, an idea that suddenly fell flat. Their eyes darted to the floor, and the laughter died on their lips as they shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just stop," Sophie whispered one evening, her voice trembling as if the weight of an unspoken truth threatened to break her. But rather than finding solace in our vulnerability, I felt a surge of anger erupt within me, fueled by a mixture of betrayal and fear. How could they turn on me now? Didn't they see that this was all we had left to fight against Ryan's cruelty? Without thinking, I dismissed them all, my angry retort echoing in the silence that followed. "You think he's going to stop just because we do? You don't know him like I do." My voice felt foreign, heavy with raw rage and desperation. It was a moment of recklessness, a storm of emotions that I couldn't contain as I hurled my words at my friends, who stood there, wide-eyed and taken aback. But as the words left my mouth, the reality of the situation hit me harder than any punch could. I was fighting a battle, yes, but the war was against myself. In a flash, I saw not just Ryan, the prick who had tormented us, but the monster I was becoming. My friends weren't just backing away from the fight, they were backing away from me. I was losing the very people I had bound myself to in this reckless act of revenge. That night, I sat alone in my dimly lit room, the silence pressing in on me like a heavy fog. I scrolled through our group chat, rereading messages filled with laughter, warmth, and a sense of belonging that felt worlds away now. I could barely recognize the camaraderie we once shared, the easy conversations about our dreams and aspirations, now overshadowed by this twisted game we had created. Suddenly, a gnawing sense of dread washed over me as I replayed Maya's words in my head. "This isn't right." She was right. We were no longer just defending ourselves against Ryan's cruelty. We were perpetuating a cycle of negativity that was tearing us apart. I realized that every audio clip sent brought us closer to being just like him, petty, vindictive, and small. The final straw came when I stumbled across a video of Ryan that someone had uploaded, showing him with his friends, carefree and genuinely laughing. The image burned into my mind. Here was a guy who thrived on the misery he caused, and yet, here he was living rent-free in our heads while we were trapped in our own personal hell, clinging to the desperate notion that our revenge was justifiable. A wave of shame washed over me, cold and unrelenting. I felt sick to my stomach. Who had I become? I had allowed Ryan to dictate my actions, to drive a wedge between me and my friends. I was spiraling, and somewhere deep within me, a voice whispered that this was my moment to break free from the cycle, not just for my sake, but for the sake of my friends, who I had merely driven away. That night, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I messaged the group, a trembling question that felt like both a confession and a challenge: what if we just stopped? What if we changed the narrative? The response was slow in coming, but when it did, it felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Maya replied first, her words filled with hesitance but an undercurrent of relief: "I think it's for the best." One by one, Sophie and Ethan began to chime in, their reassurances and support forming a fragile bridge back to the friendship we'd nearly lost. As the conversation unfolded, I could feel the weight lifting, like a curtain being pulled back to let in the light. Maybe we could find a way to reclaim our peace, to rise above the pettiness that Ryan had sparked within us. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, I felt as though we could do it together. In that moment of vulnerability, I realized that revenge did not have to define us. We could choose empathy over anger, laughter over bitterness. As I stared at my phone after that pivotal conversation, a new idea began to form in my mind, a way to take back our power without continuing the toxic cycle Ryan had forced upon us. The thought sparked excitement within me, and I couldn't help but smile as I put together a clever plan that promised not only to reclaim our dignity but to show Ryan that we were not the pathetic losers he thought we were. The first part of the plan was deceptively simple: we would stage a distraction. I knew Ryan loved to be the center of attention, so I suggested we host our own event, a talent show of sorts, but with a twist. Each of us would showcase something creative or ridiculous, but instead of focusing on our performances, We would encourage everyone in our friend groups to help create the buzz around it on social media. The goal was to draw attention away from Ryan and onto us. The more we stood in the spotlight, the less power Ryan would have over us. It was time to take control of our narrative. We would create a dedicated hashtag for the event, something catchy that would make Ryan curious and desperate to know what was happening. I envisioned hashtag not a band but the squad, and I could practically hear the collective eye rolls and laughter from my friends. The idea was to flood our social media feeds with positive affirmations, art, and goofy moments to drown out Ryan's mocking posts. If he wanted to engage with us, he would have to step into our world, which was filled with joy rather than petty revenge. Next, we had to orchestrate a direct invitation to Ryan, but this time, it would be different. We would send him a formal invite to our talent show, complete with an absurdly playful design. I crafted the message, blending sincerity with sarcasm. Dear Ryan, your presence is requested at our inaugural talent showcase. We would be honored to have the esteemed judge of all things talentless witness our mediocre creations. Date and time, TBA, we know you have a busy schedule. The plan was to make him feel included, to draw him back into our circle while flipping the script. I wanted him to see us not as the pathetic losers he labeled us, but as a group of friends having fun without him, an exclusive event he was missing out on. On the day of the talent showcase, we transformed my living room into a makeshift stage. Each of us prepared our acts, a mix of singing, bizarre skits, and even dance-offs that bordered on the ridiculous. I created a PowerPoint presentation filled with inside jokes and images from our shared past that captured our friendship and laughter. The goal was to celebrate us and remind ourselves of the bond we had formed, even in the midst of the chaos Ryan had instigated. We agreed to keep Ryan updated through our group chat. As we shared pictures and videos leading up to the event, we made sure to include little nods to the joy found in each other. I could feel the anticipation building, as if we were reviving the true essence of our friendship, and each post felt like a small victory against the negativity Ryan had cast over us. The night of the talent show arrived, and with it came a wave of nervous energy. We live-streamed the event to our friends and followers, and even though Ryan hadn't yet, the energy in the room crackled with anticipation as we adjusted the makeshift stage lights, casting a warm glow across the gathered faces of my friends. My heart raced, and the atmosphere pulsed with a cocktail of excitement and fear. We weren't just putting on a show, we were staging a rebellion against the dark cloud Ryan had cast over our lives. With the cameras rolling, Sophie kicked off the night with her rendition of a pop song, a mix of pitchy notes and nervous laughter that had us all in fits. The room erupted with applause and cheers that echoed against the walls, a sound that felt like pure magic. Each performance drew us closer. Ethan's awkward dance moves drew out tangible, bubbling laughter, his goofy, exaggerated motions painting smiles on our faces. And then, it was my turn. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the improvised stage, holding the microphone with a shaky grip. The room fell silent, eyes fixed on me, and for a moment, I felt vulnerable. My fingers fumbled, but then I remembered what we were doing. We were reclaiming our narrative, we were more than the Diarrhea squad. I launched into a heartfelt monologue, recounting the chaos Ryan had brought into our lives. You know, it's easy to tear someone down, but what's harder is lifting each other up, I said, my voice steadying as I caught the supportive glances from my friends. Tonight, we choose joy. We choose laughter. We choose each other. The room erupted in ovation. As I stepped back from the mic, the weight I had carried for months began to lift, a wave of relief washing over me. We weren't just mocking Ryan anymore, we were celebrating the very essence of who we were as a group. After I stepped down, I fought through the nervous energy bubbling in my stomach, wondering if Ryan would show up, but I shook off the thought. It didn't matter. We had each other, and we were doing this for us. Ethan had a surprise act planned. He and Sophie had teamed up for a skit that involved a mock interview with an imaginary Ryan, complete with exaggerated impressions and playful jabs. As they mimicked his condescending laugh and smug expressions, I could feel the tension draining away. The room roared with laughter, a sweet echo of the companionship we thought we lost. And then, as if the universe conspired to align our energies, just as the laughter peaked, Ryan's name lit up the group chat. What's this nonsense? You think you can just pretend I don't exist? The mood shifted. This was it, the moment of reckoning. I glanced around at my friends, their expressions revealing a mix of anxiety and excitement. Let's not let him ruin our night, I said, my voice rising with conviction. We're having fun. We're reclaiming our joy, and he can either be part of it or sit in his misery. I sent him a response, not laced with animosity, but with an olive branch. We'd love for you to join us, Ryan. We're celebrating friendship tonight. Maybe you'll learn something. The message was bold, a defiant challenge wrapped in humor. The thrill of uncertainty hung in the air. Silence enveloped our little gathering for a heartbeat as we awaited his response. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. Would he take the bait? My friends looked around, bouncing hints of nervous anticipation off one another. Ryan's reply came through seconds later, didn't. As the night wore on, the joy we had reclaimed began to weave a new thread into our lives, stitching together the frayed edges of our friendship. Laughter rang through my living room as we finished the final act of the talent show, and I felt a warmth spreading in my chest that years of Ryan's torment had almost stripped away. Despite the echoes of his words still lingering in our minds, we had turned his taunts into a celebration of resilience. But in the aftermath of our performance, a heavy silence fell when I took a moment to glance at the group chat again. Ryan had responded. A screenshot appeared on my phone, his reply flashing like a lightning bolt. You think this is cute? It said, really? You'll always be the Diarrhea squad to me. I felt the familiar clench of anger rise in my stomach, but this time, I was anchored by the laughter and warmth surrounding me. Sophie saw my face change, her hand gently squeezing mine. Don't let it get to you, she whispered, and I took a deep breath. Ryan's words no longer had the power they once did. The reality of that night was tangible. We had chosen joy over bitterness, and our friendship was now fortified by it. But then came the ripple effect of our little rebellion. The next day, our talent show went viral, within our friend group circles, shared, reshared, and even dubbed a must-see. The name Diarrhea Squad transformed into a badge of honor, a cheeky symbol of our triumph over Ryan's toxicity. At work, my colleagues approached me, laughter in their eyes as they shared clips from the show, and for the first time, I felt pride swelling within me instead of shame. Yet, Ryan's presence still loomed over us, like a storm cloud threatening to spoil our bright sun. I overheard whispers in the hallways as people began to pick sides, some laughing with us, while others, still under Ryan's spell, chose to deride our light-hearted revenge. It stung, but I found solace in the smiles of my true friends. Maya, ever the perceptive one, pulled me aside one day, her voice low but earnest. I'm proud of how we stood up for each other, she said, but we shouldn't let him take up space in our heads anymore. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words as a sense of clarity washed over me. In that moment, I decided we would take our power back entirely. We began crafting a response video, a direct rebuttal to Ryan's mockery. Our intention was not to hurt him but to shift the narrative. We wanted to redefine our group, to show everyone, including ourselves, that we were more than someone else's punchline. We invited friends to share their own stories of overcoming bullying, of defying the negativity around them. The video turned into a montage of laughter and heartwarming tales, capturing the essence of our friendship and the strength we had found together. Instead of being defined by Ryan's scorn, we became a beacon of hope and resilience. Just as we were ready to launch the video, another text from Ryan came through, filled with snide comments and sneers. Trying to be inspirational now? Good luck with that. In stark contrast to those words, the final product of our creation was released, and the reaction was overwhelming. Our friends rallied around us, sharing not just our video, but their own, and with every share, every like, we felt an incredible rush of affirmation. The laughter came flooding back, a reminder. Hey everyone, my name is Joanna, and I'm sitting down to share something that's been festering inside me for far too long. I'm not proud of what I'm plotting, but sometimes life pushes you to your limits, and all you can think about is how to fight back. If you've ever experienced a neighbor crossing the line, then you'll understand where I'm coming from. Let me paint you a picture of my world. I live in a cozy little 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet suburban neighborhood, tucked away in a small town known for its friendly atmosphere. Except, The past few years have felt anything but friendly thanks to my next-door neighbor, Mark. Mark is one of those people who loves to flaunt his privilege, always strutting around like he owns the place, because, in his mind, he practically does. He's got this enormous lawn which, I'll admit, is beautifully maintained, but it's not just the grass that's been getting under my skin. It's the incessant noise, his loud parties that go on until the early morning, blaring music so obnoxiously it feels like I'm living in a club instead of a suburb. And then there's his attitude. He's got an ego the size of a house and a knack for belittling those around him. I remember the time he scoffed at my garden, calling my flowers weeds and suggesting I stick to low-maintenance plants. It was a small comment, but it stuck with me, as if he were trying to diminish my entire being. I took pride in those flowers, and suddenly they felt like a symbol of my failures in his eyes. It wasn't just his parties or his hurtful comments. It was the arrogance in how he dealt with people that really grated on me. He once threatened to call the HOA on my son's basketball hoop, claiming it was an eyesore. Never mind that the kids in the neighborhood loved playing with it. Mark didn't just want to be the king of his castle, he wanted to reign over mine, too. I tried being the better person. I had coffee with him on occasion, tried to build a rapport, but every time we interacted, I felt like I was just feeding his ego. He brushed off my concerns and laughed at my attempts to be friendly. That's when I realized, no amount of kindness would ever reach him. So here I am, in this self-imposed exile of anger and resentment, concocting a plan to inconvenience him just enough to knock him off his pedestal. I know revenge isn't the answer, but in my heart, it feels like the only way to reclaim my sense of peace in a neighborhood that's become a battleground. And thus begins my journey, a quest not for destruction, but for some small measure of justice. I'm reaching out to all of you, hoping to channel my frustration into something creative, clever, and maybe even a little fun. Welcome to my world of quiet rebellion, where I'm about to make Mark regret ever crossing paths with me. The tipping point came last summer, a scorching afternoon when the entire neighborhood was parched and on edge. I had just finished mowing my lawn, beads of sweat lining my forehead, when I heard muffled laughter and music drifting from Mark's backyard. I was annoyed, but I tried to shake it off. After all, summer was for gatherings, right? But this wasn't just a small gathering, it was an all-out bash. I tried to focus on the flower beds, pruning and pulling weeds, but the music only grew louder, accompanied by the sounds of clinking glasses and raucous laughter. An hour into their revelry, my son Jake came outside, frustrated and red-faced. "Mom, I can't hear myself think. Can we go to the park or something?" That was my breaking point. It wasn't just the noise, it was the blatant disregard for the rest of us living on this street. I looked over the fence and saw Mark lounging in his inflatable pool, a smug smile plastered on his face, orchestrating his guests as if he were a celebrity at a private event. My heart sank. This was the man who had the audacity to call my flowers weeds, and now he was putting my family's comfort on the back burner for his self-indulgence. The evening dragged on, and after nearly 3 hours of chaos, I finally snapped. I stormed over to his yard, my heart pounding and my fists clenched at my sides. I could feel the stares of guests as I approached, but I didn't care. I demanded he turn down the music. To my utter disbelief, he laughed in my face, an obnoxious, mocking sound. "Lighten up, Joanna. It's just a party. If you can't handle it, maybe you should invest in some earplugs." My cheeks burned with humiliation. I turned on my heel and walked away, anger bubbling inside me like a simmering pot. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was powerless while he reveled in his self-made kingdom. The next day, I discovered that my 15-year-old son had been bullied at school for being the kid whose mom can't even get her neighbor to turn down his music. That was when Mark crossed the line. He hadn't just trampled my peace, he had affected my child. I called my husband, crying, my voice trembling as I recounted the events. His response was to let it go, to rise above it and take the high road. But how could I, when Mark had turned my home, a place of solace, into a source of anxiety and humiliation? Days turned into weeks of simmering resentment. Each time I saw Mark in his backyard, basking in the sun, a knot twisted tighter in my stomach. Every time I heard laughter echoing between the fences, it was a reminder that I was stuck in a one-sided war. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. But in that darkness, something started to shift within me. I began to fantasize about little inconveniences, small annoyances that would disrupt his precious routine. The thought of him feeling the way I had felt that day became intoxicating. Each idea felt like a spark igniting a fire, my rage morphing into a strategy. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be disrespected, to lose a little bit of that smug smile, a chance for him to taste the bitterness of his own arrogance. As the summer heat persisted, I started to plan. It was time for Mark to realize that he wasn't untouchable, that his reign over the neighborhood wasn't as absolute as he believed. I would no longer be the silent neighbor next door. The games had begun, and I was ready to play mine. I needed help, though, ideas that could make my plans not only effective but also deliciously entertaining. And so, here I am, pouring out my heart to you all, hoping together we can craft the perfect, harmless revenge. Because sometimes, the most satisfying victories come not from grand gestures but from subtly orchestrated inconveniences that remind the arrogant of their humanity. The first week of my plotting felt like a pressure cooker simmering just below a bubble, but soon, the heat intensified. I decided to start small, a few harmless pranks that would send a subtle message. With the help of some online forums, I gathered ideas, annoying yet lighthearted tactics that could disrupt Mark's routine without crossing any lines. I mean, who wouldn't want to mess with a lawn that was so proud and ostentatious? I took to the local hardware store, purchasing some fake for sale signs that I could accidentally stick in his yard during one of his loud parties. I convinced myself it was harmless, a way to poke fun at his inflated sense of self-importance. It felt good to laugh about it, to think about how it would make him squirm. But what began as innocent mischief quickly spiraled into something more sinister. One night as I was preparing for bed, I heard Mark's party kick off again. The volume was unbearable, the vibrations creeping through my walls as if the bass was in my very bones. I snapped. I started pacing, a whirlwind of frustration swirling around me. In that moment, my innocent pranks transformed into a fury I hadn't anticipated. I stepped outside, my heart racing, and began to fill a bucket with ice water, ready to spill it over the fence just to see the shock on his face. I hesitated. Was I really going to do this? But then I thought about my son, about the way Mark had ridiculed him. In my mind, it felt justified, until I spilled the water, not over Mark, but onto my patio. It hit the wooden boards with a loud thud, echoing back my failure. It was that very evening that I made my first real move. I found an anonymous number and sent a complaint to the HOA about the noise, listing the violation of local noise ordinances. The thrill of that small act was intoxicating. I felt like I was finally taking control, but it also stirred something deeper inside me, a taste for vindication that I hadn't expected. But then, the retaliation came. Just 2 days later, Mark confronted me while I was gardening, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, a storm brewing in his eyes. "Joanna, I know it was you. You had to stoop low enough to drag the HOA into this?" His voice dripped with condescension, the smug smile replaced by anger. "You could have just talked to me like an adult. But I guess that's too much to expect from a woman like you." Each word cut into me like a jagged knife. I thought I was getting even, but instead, I had opened myself up to his disdain. I felt like a coward and a fool, standing there with my gardening gloves on, vulnerable under the weight of his contempt. I tried to defend myself, but my voice wavered, and the self-assuredness I had mustered crumbled under his glare. That was when I noticed the other neighbors peeking from behind their curtains, their eyes wide, whispering among themselves. I was suddenly the subject of their scrutiny, a neighbor who had gone too far in seeking revenge. Mark had turned my innocuous attempts into a spectacle, and I was the one left humiliated. After that confrontation, I no longer felt like I was wielding the power. Instead, I felt exposed, as if I was holding a loaded weapon with the safety off. It wasn't long before Mark retaliated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every morning, just as the sun peeked over the horizon, he would start his yard work, mowing the lawn or power washing his driveway with the volume cranked up to 11. I would scramble to close the windows, desperate to drown out the din, but it was futile. It felt like he was out to make my life hell, determined to show me who was boss. Then, I found out he had convinced our neighborhood association to ban my son's basketball hoop entirely. They claimed it was a safety hazard, but I knew it was Mark pulling strings behind the scenes. When my son came home with the news, utterly crushed, I felt a surge of anger that blotted out everything else. I called my husband again, this time in a frenzy, demanding he do something to support our family against Mark's unreasonable actions. His response was still the same: just ignore him, Joanna. Don't let him get under your skin. But how could I? The pressure was building, and my efforts to reclaim my space were morphing into a war I never intended to wage. As summer wore on, the situation grew more volatile. My pranks became bolder, more elaborate as I searched for ways to undermine Mark without getting my hands dirty. I had arranged to have a dozen inflatable flamingos delivered to his yard during one of his notorious soirees. I could hardly contain my laughter as I imagined him stepping outside to find a lawn full of bright pink nuisances. But every action had consequences. Mark retaliated by putting up a wooden privacy fence, towering over the existing one, blocking out sunlight from my little garden. And with that, any remnant of peace I had left began to evaporate. In my heart, I still believed I was fighting for the neighborhood against arrogance, yet with every prank that backfired, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. The spiral continued, each act of revenge fueling another wave of retaliation, and soon I realized I was trapped in a cycle of escalation that was consuming my peace and sense of self. What had begun as a simple desire for justice had now turned into a toxic dance of vengeance. I needed help more than ever, not just in plotting more inconveniences, but in finding a way to reclaim my dignity without losing myself in the process. With every passing day, my anger transformed, and I had to face the truth: I was becoming just as arrogant as Mark. It was time to decide whether I wanted to rise above it or continue down this dark path of revenge. I needed to break the cycle, but how? It was a sweltering August afternoon, and I found myself staring at the blank wall of my bedroom, the sunlight filtering in through the curtains creating patterns on the floor. My head spun with thoughts of revenge, each idea more ludicrous than the last. I could feel the bitterness in my stomach, an unsettling mixture of anger and sorrow swirling within me. I was exhausted, physically from the petty clashes with Mark, and emotionally from the guilt creeping in. That day, I had just finished an exhausting 3-hour battle against my inner turmoil. I had spent the morning dissecting my latest prank, filling his lawn with hundreds of plastic flamingos. I had imagined his face contorting in disbelief, perhaps even the hint of a smirk crossing my lips as I envisioned the chaos it would unleash. But the moment I started to gather supplies, a deep, gnawing feeling settled in my gut. Was I really going to stoop to his level? As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed insistently next to me. It was Jake, sending me a photo of his latest game, a snapshot of him and his friends at the park, all laughing, all free from the chaos that had engulfed our home. The contrast between my son's carefree smile and the heaviness in my heart struck me. I had been so preoccupied with my own bitterness that I had forgotten what this was truly about: my family, my peace, my son's happiness. In that moment, clarity washed over me like a cool breeze. I realized that I had been consumed by a cycle of petty revenge that was damaging not only my relationship with Mark but also my own inner peace and my family's happiness. I had allowed this neighbor to become the architect of my misery, and in turn, I had become the architect of my own discontent. It was a revelation that shook me to my core. I couldn't keep going down this path. This wasn't me, this wasn't the Joanna I wanted to be. In my quest for justice, I was losing sight of who I was as a person. I didn't want to be that neighbor, the one recognized for pettiness and spite. I wanted to be the person who could rise above it all, who could handle conflict with grace, even in the face of Mark's arrogance. But how? The question lingered, echoing in my mind. I needed to find a way to stand up for myself without resorting to childish antics or going to war. It was time to reclaim my power, not through revenge but through assertiveness. I began to formulate a new plan, one focused on communication rather than conflict. What if I directly confronted Mark, not with anger but with clarity? I needed to show him the impact of his actions, not just on me but on our entire neighborhood. I wanted him to understand that he wasn't just affecting me, but the community we both lived in. That evening, I walked outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and as I approached the fence that separated our yards, I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about restoring balance. When I saw Mark outside, tending to his infamous lawn, I felt my heart race. I approached him, my hands trembling slightly, but I pressed on. "Mark, can we talk?" He turned, surprise flickering across his face before settling into that familiar smirk. "What's the matter, Joanna? Had enough of your little pranks?" My heart sank for a moment, but I pushed through. "No, actually. I wanted to discuss how we can coexist better. I feel like our recent conflicts have escalated, and it's affecting not just us, but everyone around us." To my astonishment, the smirk faded. I could see a hint of uncertainty in his eyes as if he wasn't expecting this approach. It was a glimmer of hope. "I don't know what you're talking about," he shot back, but there was a hesitance in his tone. I pressed on, speaking with conviction. "Your parties have been loud enough to disrupt my family's peace, and you've made hurtful comments that have affected my son. I want to find a way to communicate openly instead of resorting to pranks or complaints. Can we work on this?" Mark shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment, I thought he would dismiss me entirely. But instead, he sighed, the weight of our unspoken tension hanging between us. "Fine. But you need to learn to lighten up. I'm not here to hold your hand." I felt a flicker of victory in that moment. We hadn't resolved anything yet, but the door had been opened. I was no longer the faceless neighbor next door. I was Joanna, a person willing to confront the chaos instead of hiding behind petty revenge. It was then that I understood, my journey wasn't just about inconveniencing Mark. It was about reclaiming my dignity, rebuilding my strength, and finding my voice in a neighborhood that had become a battleground. That day marked the turning point in my story, a moment where I chose growth over bitterness, where I decided that the best way to disrupt Mark's reign wasn't through revenge but through genuine communication. And while I still felt the echoes of anger and resentment, I now had the tools to conquer them, not by fighting fire with fire, but by building bridges instead of walls. From that moment on, I was determined to face whatever came next with courage, to reclaim my space, and, perhaps, to transform this chaotic mess into a chance for a new beginning. Because ultimately, real power lies not in vengeance, but in the strength to reach out and connect, even with those who may seem impossible to understand. I still needed help, but this time, it was to gather ideas on how to foster a sense of community, to build relationships rather than destroy them. I was ready for a new chapter, one that focused not on revenge but on harmony. And with that realization, I took a step back from the precipice of chaos and began to walk toward a brighter future, one conversation at a time. Alright, folks, this is where things get creative. I've spent sleepless nights plotting, thinking of ways to execute a plan that would get under Mark's skin without resorting to sabotage or anything too drastic. My intention isn't to become the villain, it's to remind him that his arrogance has consequences. With that in mind, here's the detailed plan I've crafted, a series of clever, light-hearted inconveniences to nudge him toward humility while keeping the neighborhood peace in mind. 1. The prankster's scavenger hunt. I'll create a neighborhood scavenger hunt that involves Mark's precious lawn. I'll invite our neighbors to participate, giving them a list of playful items to find in Mark's yard, things like a rubber chicken, a gnome wearing sunglasses, and a collection of colorful pool floats. Each item will be placed discreetly but in such a way that it's visible enough to be noticed. The goal isn't to destroy anything but to fill his yard with unexpected, comical surprises that will make him the talk of the neighborhood, all while keeping the tone playful. 2. The barbecue bonanza. It's time for a neighborhood barbecue, but here's the twist. I'll check with the HOA to reserve the park for a community get-together on a Saturday when Mark typically has his loud parties. I'll send invites to everyone, subtly hinting that it would be fantastic for them to enjoy a relaxing Saturday afternoon with games, food, and fun right when Mark is planning his next bash. This way, his loud music won't be the only sound echoing through our suburb, it'll be laughter and camaraderie from the community uniting against the noise pollution he creates. 3. The mysterious noise complaint. In collaboration with a couple of neighbors who share my frustrations, I plan to submit ambiguous noise complaints to the HOA every time Mark throws a party. The complaints will be vague enough so that they can't be attributed directly to me, like disturbing sounds late at night without specifying what those sounds are. It'll create a ripple effect, and eventually, Mark will find himself questioned by the HOA about his noise levels. For someone who thrives on being the center of attention, being called out for rowdiness will be a significant blow to his ego. 4. The gardening gambit. I will plant a flower bed in the front yard that mirrors Mark's prized garden but with a quirky twist. In between my beloved flowers, I'll add wild elements like brightly colored painted rocks or whimsical garden decorations to create a contrast that's impossible to ignore. I'll make sure the arrangement is vibrant and eye-catching, so much so that it almost feels like a challenge. When he sees my playful rebellion, it'll serve as a reminder of how far he went to belittle my gardening skills. 5. The community newsletter. I'll start writing a monthly community newsletter, spotlighting the positive aspects of our neighborhood while subtly addressing issues like noise pollution. In a lighthearted tone, I'll include sections dedicated to noisy neighbors of the month and focus on promoting understanding and compassion among neighbors. It'll be cheeky, think let's all be the type of neighbor we'd like to have type of vibes. If Mark catches wind of this, he may start to feel the pressure of public perception shifting against him. 6. The Local Hero Initiative. I'll organize a Neighborhood Hero Initiative where we celebrate community members doing good deeds. I'll nominate myself and others who have contributed positively to our street and encourage them to do the same. Who knows? Maybe Mark will want to participate, and I can challenge him to do something beneficial for the community instead of partying every weekend. This can create a platform for conversation about respect and neighborly love, forcing him to reevaluate his approach. 7. The claim to fame. I'm going to create a faux award titled Best Lawn of 2023 and present it to myself, just for fun. To make it even more entertaining, I'll invite Mark over, and during a casual gathering, I'll unveil it while making a lighthearted speech about how a perfect lawn means peace and quiet for the neighborhood. I'll even get a funny trophy with a lawnmower on it. Watching him squirm while I highlight the importance of neighborly respect will be oddly satisfying. 8. Involving local media. If all else fails, I might just reach out to the local newspaper with a lighthearted pitch about our community's quirky neighbors. My intention would be to highlight how everyone can coexist harmoniously, using humorous anecdotes that could include a mention of the loud party next door without directly calling anyone out. If it garners attention, it could bring the consequences of his actions to a larger audience he never expected. With my plan laid out in detail, it's time to put it into action. The beauty of this approach is that it's layered with humor, it doesn't feel aggressive and reflects more on his behavior than my own. The key will be timing and ensuring that each prank or plan unfolds smoothly, keeping the spirit lighthearted and maintaining my integrity throughout the process. Of course, I'll have to tread carefully to avoid crossing the line into vindictiveness, but I'm feeling invigorated by the idea of reclaiming my space without losing sight of who I am. The first step will be the scavenger hunt, and from there, I can build on my ideas, adjusting them as I see fit based on Mark's reactions. Ultimately, I want to create a sense of community that contrasts sharply with Mark's self-absorbed attitude. My hope is that through these clever inconveniences, we can reclaim our neighborhood. Not just for me but for everyone who has felt belittled or marginalized because of one arrogant neighbor. Because in the end, it's not just about getting back at Mark, it's about standing up for what's right and reminding him that respect is a two-way street. And who knows? Maybe in the process, I'll even find a way to mend the rift between us, a long shot, but worth a try. Let the games begin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air around me crackled with anticipation. I had meticulously plotted my course of action, and tonight marked the beginning of my carefully crafted revenge, a series of lighthearted inconveniences that would disrupt Mark's status quo without igniting an outright war. I could feel the tension coursing through my veins as I stood at the edge of my yard, peering through the slats of the fence that separated our properties. The night was alive with activity as laughter and music spilled from Mark's backyard. I could see the silhouettes of guests dancing, their movements exaggerated in the dim light. A wicked grin crept across my face. This was it, the perfect moment to unleash the first part of my plan. The scavenger hunt would unfold under the veil of his party, a delightful surprise that would make him the unwilling host of chaos. I gathered the supplies I had hidden in my garage, a collection of inflatable flamingos, rubber chickens, and brightly painted rocks. I felt like a mischievous sprite, cloaked in the dark, ready to unleash some whimsy upon this self-absorbed king of the cul-de-sac. My heart raced as I crept toward his yard, fueled by the thrill of executing my plan. The first few items went unnoticed, the music drowned out any sound of my sneaky movements. I planted a rubber chicken right in the center of his meticulously manicured lawn, striking a perfect balance between absurdity and annoyance. Then, I tossed an inflatable flamingo into his pool with a splash that echoed through the night, sending ripples of color across the water's surface. Each item I positioned felt like a little victory, a whimsical jab at the man who had made my life unbearable. But it wasn't until I placed the last flamingo, artfully arranged around the party's gathering point, that I felt a rush of exhilaration wash over me. As I turned to retreat, I caught a glimpse of Mark through the window. There he was, the king of his domain, unaware of the delightful chaos unfolding just outside his carefully curated bubble. As I slipped back into my yard, my heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't wait for the reactions from the guests, the laughter, the confusion, the bewilderment that would surely ensue. But I wasn't done just yet. The barbecue bonanza was next on my agenda, and I was determined to make it a night to remember for everyone in the neighborhood, except for Mark. I gathered my neighbors, those who had shared my frustrations, and invited them to the park the following weekend for the community barbecue. As we set up, the air buzzed with excitement and camaraderie, a stark contrast to the discord Mark had sown. Our laughter echoed through the warm evening air, and I could feel the tension melting away as we grilled burgers and shared stories, creating a tapestry of connection that had been missing for so long. But I still needed to make my point clear. I took a moment to send a text to Mark, letting him know about the barbecue and inviting him to join. "Hey Mark, we're having a neighborhood barbecue in the park this Saturday. It'll be great to see everyone together. Let's celebrate our community." I hit send, my heart racing. Would he have the humility to join us? Or would he simply ignore the invitation, continuing his reign of singularity? As we gathered around, neighbors began to trickle in, bringing dishes to share, and I couldn't shake the feeling of exhilaration that surged through me. The air was thick with the aroma of grilled food, and laughter filled the space, a sound I hadn't enjoyed in ages, overshadowed for so long by Mark's loud parties. At the height of our gathering, I noticed a figure approaching in the distance, unmistakable in the fading light. It was Mark, striding toward us with a mixture of curiosity and irritation etched on his face. My heart raced, a mixture of excitement and anxiety swelling within me. Would he confront me in front of everyone, or would we find a way to bridge this gap? As he reached the edge of the gathering, I approached him, a smile plastered on my face. "Hey, Mark. Glad you could make it." He raised an eyebrow, looking around at the crowd with a forced smile. "What's all this? A party without me? I thought I was the life of the neighborhood." "Just trying to foster community spirit, Mark," I replied, keeping my tone light. "You know, something we've all been missing for a while." He scoffed, folding his arms across his chest. "Is that what this is? A bunch of neighbors trying to gang up on me?" I could feel the tension in the air, but I pushed through. "No, it's not about that. It's about reminding ourselves what it means to be a community. You don't have to throw parties for everyone to have fun together." For a moment, silence hung between us. The laughter of the neighbors faded into the background, and I could sense the weight of his pride pressing down on him. Just as I began to doubt whether this conversation was worth it, a neighbor stepped forward, offering Mark a plate of food. "Hey Mark, grab a burger. It's good to see you here." To my surprise, Mark hesitated but then took the plate, joining the gathering. As the evening wore on, we engaged in small talk, and I could see subtle shifts happening around us, other neighbors welcoming him, forcing him to participate in this community feel. The tension was still there, but it was beginning to soften under the weight of shared stories and laughter. Just as I thought the night couldn't get any better, I caught sight of my eldest neighbor, Mr. Thompson, making his way toward Mark. "You know, Mark," he began, "your parties are definitely lively, but don't you think a little balance wouldn't hurt? We'd love to have you join us more often. We want to get to know you better, be a part of this community, and honestly, we could use some of that energy on a weeknight too." Mark stared, caught off guard by the unexpected push from Mr. Thompson. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the bravado in his posture faltering. "Yeah, maybe I could swing by," he grumbled, the arrogance slowly seeping away from his tone. As the evening drew to a close, Mark and I found ourselves standing side by side, the previous animosity replaced with an unspoken understanding. He turned to me, a hint of vulnerability flashing in his eyes. I didn't realize how much I'd isolated myself. Maybe I should be more involved. "I appreciate you reaching out." My heart swelled. This was a moment of poetic justice, a small victory for the woman who once felt powerless. In confronting Mark while managing to maintain a sense of humor and community, I'd reminded him that his arrogance came with consequences, and that perhaps, even he could learn to be humble among neighbors. As we wrapped up the barbecue, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. My journey hadn't been about revenge at all. It had been about reclaiming my place in the neighborhood while also challenging Mark to look beyond his ego. With every moment spent laughing and connecting, we were redefining our relationships, turning an enemy into a potential ally. As the stars twinkled above, I realized that revenge had morphed into something far more powerful, the chance for healing, growth, and a renewed sense of community. I went to bed that night, not just feeling victorious but liberated, no longer shackled by anger but instead surrounded by the warmth of friendship and understanding. Perhaps, just perhaps, Mark and I could forge a new path forward. And as I drifted into a peaceful sleep, I understood that sometimes the most satisfying rebellions come not from petty revenge but from compassion and forgiveness, a lesson I would carry with me long after the final echoes of laughter faded into the night. The days following our barbecue were filled with a mixture of anticipation and reflection. In the wake of what I had once envisioned as a grand act of revenge, I found myself caught in an unexpected cycle of growth and transformation. I had stepped into the realm of confrontation, and instead of chaos, I was met with the possibility of reconciliation. Mark's shift was palpable, his posture softened as he engaged with the neighborhood in ways I hadn't thought possible. He began to host less ostentatious gatherings, opting for quieter afternoons filled with barbecues that included the very neighbors he had once dismissed. I watched as he made an effort, contributing his culinary skills and slowly dismantling the barriers he had built around himself. This was the same man who had once ridiculed my flowers, and yet here he was, actively participating in discussions about community improvement and engagement. I found myself torn. Had I inadvertently made a friend out of an enemy? As my initial thrill of victory faded, I felt a mix of relief and discomfort. I had wanted to inconvenience Mark, to remind him of his arrogance and how it affected all of us. But instead, I had given him a chance to reflect and grow. My heart grappled with the realization that perhaps, just perhaps, people could change if given the opportunity. Jake, my son, noticed the changes too. He had been skeptical of me at first, the pranks, the plots, the focus on revenge. But as Mark started to engage more with our family, inviting Jake to join in his backyard soccer games, I could see the walls of discomfort begin to crumble. My son's laughter filled the air once more, and I was reminded of the primary driving force behind my actions, the well-being of my family. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still felt the echoes of resentment that had once fueled my every interaction with Mark. When neighbors would chat about his newfound civility, I caught myself brushing off the compliments with a twinge of indignation. It was hard to reconcile my initial instincts with the man he had become, and sometimes I found myself resentful of the fact that he seemed to be basking in the glow of redemption without fully acknowledging the pain he had inflicted on me and others. One afternoon, while pruning the flowers in my garden that I had grown to love, I caught a glimpse of Mark through the slats of the fence, tossing a soccer ball with Jake. An unexpected wave of emotion washed over me, pride, relief, and an overwhelming sense of bittersweet loss. My plan had worked, but at what cost? I had aimed for revenge, only to craft a bridge instead. That evening, as I settled into the soft embrace of my couch, I pondered everything that had transpired. My thoughts drifted back to my initial resolve, the desire for a small measure of justice. In the end, I found myself grappling with a deeper realization. I had gone into this journey seeking revenge, and yet I emerged with something much more profound, a chance to foster compassion and growth, not only for myself but for those around me. A few weeks later, as the summer days shortened and the crisp air of autumn began to seep in, I received an unexpected text from Mark. "Hey Joanna, I'm planning a neighborhood cleanup day next Saturday. We're all in this together, right? Hope you and your family can join." I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. It was a simple invitation, but it was also a challenge, a way for us both to officially acknowledge the shift in our relationship. I realized that although Mark had changed, I had to meet him halfway. I responded with enthusiasm, eager to support the initiative while also grateful for the evolution of our neighborly connection. As that Saturday dawned bright and clear, I stood alongside Mark, a stark contrast to the animosity that had once defined our interactions. The neighborhood came alive with laughter and teamwork as we pulled weeds, picked up litter, and shared stories. It was a newfound camaraderie, and I couldn't shake the feeling of hope that filled the air. At one point, as we took a break, Mark turned to me. "I owe you an apology, Joanna. I didn't realize how blind I'd become to the community around me. Thank you for pushing me to be a better neighbor." In that moment, all the anger and resentment I had harbored began to dissolve. I nodded, understanding the complexities of change and growth. "And I appreciate you being willing to listen," I replied, my voice steady. "Sometimes it just takes a little nudge to see what really matters." As the sun set over our neighborhood that evening, I realized I had come full circle. What began as a quest for petty revenge had transformed into a journey of empowerment and connection, an opportunity to foster community instead of division. I had confronted my anger, embraced my vulnerability, and forged a new path forward not just for myself, but for everyone around me. Sometimes, I thought, the greatest victories come not from striking back but from reaching out. In the end, it didn't matter whether I inconvenienced my neighbor or not. What truly resonated was the knowledge that I could choose compassion over chaos, understanding over indignation. As I lay in bed that night, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, not for my cunning plans but for the unexpected friendships that emerged from the depths of conflict. It was a reminder that every relationship, regardless of its rocky beginnings, holds the potential for healing and transformation. And with that thought, I drifted off to sleep, my heart lighter than it had felt in a long time, the remnants of anger finally giving way to hope, peace, and the blossoming of newfound connections. Because in the grand tapestry of life, each thread, each clash, and each gentle understanding stitched together the fabric of our shared existence, a vibrant community, alive and thriving, forged in the fires of conflict and the embers of friendship. So, if you find yourself in a similar situation, remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against arrogance isn't revenge, it's humanity and the willingness to be better, together. Hey everyone, my name is Joanna, and I'm here to share a story that has haunted me for years, a tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and, yes, revenge. Picture this, a small town in the heart of the Midwest, where the air is thick with humidity during summer, and the streets are lined with the golden glow of street lamp light during the long, lonely nights. It's a place where everyone knows each other, where secrets can feel like a heavy stone in your gut. And trust me, the secret I carried would weigh me down for a long time. Growing up, my world revolved around two key people, my best friend, Sarah, and a boy named Mark, who had a smile that could light up even the gloomiest of days. Sarah and I were inseparable, two peas in a pod, the kind of friendship you think will last forever. We dreamed about the future, talked about college, and shared all our secrets under a blanket of stars. I never imagined that our lives would take such a dark turn, that a single betrayal would unravel everything we held dear. Mark was the boy next door, the charming, athletic type who could easily steal any girl's heart. He had a way of making everyone feel special, and I was no exception. The crush I had on him was innocent at first, wrapped in the protective bubble of friendship. But as we grew older, that crush deepened into something more. I felt like I was walking on air whenever he was around. The laughter, the whispers, the stolen glances, it was everything I had ever wanted. I never thought he'd turn out to be the catalyst for my darkest moments. Then came the fateful night, the night that would change everything. It was a summer evening, warm and intoxicating, perfumed with the scent of blooming jasmine. I remember wearing my favorite sundress, feeling beautiful and carefree. I had no idea that behind my back, Sarah was plotting something that would shatter my heart and ignite a fire within me that I couldn't control. As I sat on my porch, watching the sun slip below the horizon, I felt a sudden chill. It was as if the universe was warning me, whispering that my world would soon crumble. Little did I know that betrayal was lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The events of that night would serve as the ignition for my quest for revenge, a journey I never wanted to embark on but felt I had no choice but to take. So, buckle up, because this isn't just a tale of retaliation, it's a journey through heartbreak and the lengths one can go to reclaim their dignity. What I did, and what I became, is something I still grapple with to this day. But one thing is for sure, the price of betrayal is steep, and I was more than willing to pay it. The darkness crept in quickly that night, a shroud that wrapped itself around my heart and mind as I waited for Mark to arrive. He'd promised he would come over after his soccer practice, and the anticipation danced in my chest. I imagined our conversations, the laughter we would share, and perhaps even the electric moment when I would finally tell him how I felt. But as I was lost in daydreams, Sarah showed up unexpectedly, her eyes gleaming with a mischievous light I hadn't seen in a while. "Hey Joe, have you heard the news?" she asked, her voice too high-pitched, too excited for my liking. I could sense something was off, but before I could question her, she pulled out her phone, a devilish grin spreading across her face. "Look," she said, thrusting the device into my hands. My heart dropped as I read the messages exchanged between Sarah and Mark. They weren't just friends, they were flirting, sending heart emojis and inside jokes that should have been reserved for me. The crushing weight of betrayal settled into my stomach like a stone, heavy and unyielding. "Sarah, what is this?" My voice trembled as I fought to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. She shrugged, feigning innocence, but I could see the thrill dancing in her eyes. "I thought you knew. I mean, we were just having a little fun. You wouldn't mind, right?" I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. This was not just a betrayal of trust, it felt like a betrayal of love, of all the dreams I had woven with Mark in my heart. Sarah had crossed a line that I never thought she would dare to. We were supposed to be best friends, sisters, even. How could she do this to me? The air grew thick with tension as I stared into her eyes, searching for any sign of remorse. All I found was a twisted satisfaction, a spark of something dark that I couldn't comprehend. In that moment, the realization hit me like a freight train: Sarah was willing to sacrifice our friendship for a taste of the attention she craved. I was nothing more than collateral damage in her reckless pursuit of validation. Then the doorbell rang, and I felt my stomach churn. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I exchanged a glance with Sarah. She could see my panic, my heartbreak, but all she did was grin, a predator eager to watch her prey be devoured. "Go answer it," she urged, pushing me toward the door as though to shove me into the very embodiment of my pain. I opened the door to find Mark standing there, his sun-kissed skin glistening with sweat, his smile radiant and contagious. The moment fell flat as I looked into his eyes, searching for the boy I thought I knew. The boy who would never betray me. But as I replayed Sarah's words in my mind, the fantasy of our moment shattered like glass, cutting deep into my heart. "Hey Joe," he said, oblivious to the chaos that was surging within me. "Ready for some ice cream?" I forced a smile, feeling my heart crack further. "Yeah, sure. Sounds great." But the words felt hollow, empty of the joy they should have contained. My mind raced, and the urge to blurt out the truth warred with the desire to cling to the last vestiges of innocence. "What's wrong?" he asked, tilting his head as he studied my face. The words bubbled up, desperate to escape, but before I could speak, Sarah chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Nothing. Just girl stuff. You know how it is." Her laughter rang hollow, mocking, as she stepped between us like a shield. I felt my heart sink. In that moment, surrounded by the very people who should have supported me, I was paralyzed by fear of losing both the boy I loved and the friend I had confided in for years. I wanted to scream, to expose the lies that threatened to unravel everything. But the thought of confronting Sarah and ruining my last precious moments with Mark held me captive. So, I played along. I laughed when Sarah teased Mark, cheered when he shared stories of his soccer victories, all the while feeling like I was drowning beneath the surface of a deceitful facade. The betrayal felt like a poison in my veins, seeping through my heart and into every fiber of my being. The tipping point came later that week, when I overheard them whispering in the hallway at school, their laughter bright and carefree. It was a sound that twisted my insides, igniting a fire of rage that I didn't know I possessed. I realized then that I couldn't sit idly by and let them build their happiness on the ashes of our friendship. Betrayal had woken something dark within me, a craving for justice that I could no longer ignore. The innocent dreams I once cherished had transformed into a burning desire for retribution. I would have my revenge. I would reclaim my power, no matter the cost. And that was the moment everything changed. I began to plot, to scheme, not just for my own peace but for the justice that I so desperately craved. The whispers of revenge echoed in my mind, and with each passing day, I became more convinced that I was capable of becoming truly diabolical. So, let me take you on this journey of darkness, a journey where the lines between right and wrong blurred, and where the thirst for revenge became the driving force of my existence. The betrayal may have sparked the fire, but what followed was a tempest that would consume everything in its path. The price of betrayal is steep, and I was more than willing to pay it. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of what Sarah and Mark had done began to sink deeper into my bones, a chilling reminder that trust is fragile and easily shattered. The whispers that once filled my heart with joy turned into haunting echoes of their laughter, following me like a shadow I couldn't shake off. Each time I passed them in the halls, I felt a visceral pain clawing at my insides. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the unbearable weight of being an outsider in a life that once felt so warm and inviting. The corners of my world crumbled. My grades began to slip as my heartache consumed my every thought. I would sit in class, my mind racing with scenarios of vengeance, rather than focusing on the lessons droning on in monotony. My teachers noticed the change. Friends who once reached out were met with silence from me. They didn't understand the turmoil bubbling beneath my surface. But it was during a particularly cruel moment that everything erupted into chaos. I walked into the cafeteria and froze. There they were, sitting at the table where Sarah and I had shared countless lunches, their heads leaning together as if sharing secrets meant only for one another. The sight of them laughing over shared jokes while I sat alone was a dagger to my heart. I could feel the blood rush to my face, humiliation and anger coiling in a tight knot within me. That day, Mark leaned in, his hand brushing against Sarah's arm as they shared a crumpled piece of paper filled with doodles and notes. I could feel my breath hitch in my throat as I watched them. It was an inescapable truth that burned through my heart. I had lost them both. Fueled by rage and despair, I made my way to the bathroom, where I could cry without the world seeing the cracks in my facade. Standing before the mirror, I dug my nails into the porcelain sink, breathing in shaky breaths. As my reflection stared back, I felt a sudden clarity pierce through the fog of pain. I didn't just want revenge, I needed it. That need surged through my veins like wildfire, igniting every dark corner of my mind. I crafted my plans meticulously, allowing my imagination to run wild. I considered exposing their texts, sending screenshots to the entire school. But there was something almost poetic about the way they thrived on their deception. Their laughter was a mask hiding the festering insecurity beneath. I wanted them to suffer, to know what it felt like to be discarded and betrayed. I started with subtlety, planting seeds of doubt among their friends. I casually dropped hints of Sarah's betrayal in conversations, watching as whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you hear about Sarah? I can't believe she would do something like that." Each whisper I sowed brought me a twisted sense of satisfaction, knowing that soon the tables would begin to turn. I wanted their precious bubble of happiness to shatter into a million pieces, each fragment a reminder of what they had done. But the darker my plans grew, the more I lost myself in the process. I stayed up late crafting fake messages and rumors, fueled by a sense of righteousness. I became consumed by this facade of a broken girl planning her revenge. At times, I would hear snippets of conversations about how Sarah had been acting differently, how Mark seemed distracted. Each rumor felt like a victory, a small win that I savored like a fine wine. Then came the day when my actions finally bore fruit. I overheard some classmates discussing Sarah's newfound reputation, a girl who couldn't be trusted, who betrayed her best friend for a boy. Just the thought of it sent a thrill through me. My heart raced with exhilaration. My plan was working, and I was only getting started. But as the days wore on, I began to notice a shift. I felt the darkness I had embraced wrap around me like a suffocating blanket. I was no longer just a spectator in this game of revenge, I was a player, and the stakes were rising. I became more isolated, losing touch with what little friendship I had left. My laughter was forced, my smile a mask to hide the monster I was becoming. And then came the email from Sarah, a desperate cry for help. The words stung, filled with confusion and pleading, as she reached out to me, trying to mend what had been broken. "Joe, I miss you. I know I messed up. Can we talk?" For a brief moment, I hesitated. The flicker of hope that she could truly understand the pain she had caused washed over me, only to be drowned by the weight of my anger. I felt a twisted sense of triumph in her desperation. She was now the one searching for answers in the wreckage of our friendship. I typed a quick response, a cold dismissal meant to reinforce my resolve, a final nail in the coffin of our camaraderie. "No, Sarah. You made your choice." The darkness within me deepened, and a chilling realization settled in. I was becoming the very thing I despised. I had transformed from the victim into the architect of my own suffering. Each day was filled with the thrill of revenge, but it came at a steep cost. I was losing myself, losing the girl who once dreamed beneath the stars, and not even the promise of revenge could fill the void that betrayal had carved in my heart. And then, that fateful day arrived, the day I had been plotting towards. The school dance was just around the corner. I saw the perfect opportunity to orchestrate my plan, to bring down Sarah and Mark in a public display of humiliation that would leave both reeling. But as I stood in front of the mirror, preparing for my moment of reckoning, I caught a glimpse of myself, of the girl I was before all this fury and heartache consumed me. A fleeting moment of regret washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by the dark thrill of revenge that coursed through my veins. Tonight, I would finally unleash all that I had planned. As the lights flickered and the music pulsed through the gym, I knew that the time for reckoning was at hand. The darkness that once felt like a comforting embrace was now an ominous storm cloud, and I was ready to dance with the devil. Soon, they would know the true meaning of betrayal, and so would everyone else. My heart raced with anticipation, the flames of vengeance licking at my soul, and there was no turning back. Welcome to my world, the world of diabolical. The night of the dance arrived, and with it came a whirlwind of emotions that clashed violently within me. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the hem of my crimson dress, the color of revenge, I thought. The fabric hugged my curves perfectly, and for a moment, I felt beautiful, powerful even. But beneath that facade of confidence lay a tempest of uncertainty and rage, battling for dominance. As I applied the last touches of makeup, my mind wandered to the hours I had spent meticulously planning my revenge. I could visualize every detail, the whispers I had planted, the rumors I had crafted. But nothing compared to the culmination of this evening. Tonight, I would shatter the illusion they had built together. Tonight, I would lay bare their betrayal for all to see. Arriving at the gym, I was struck by the atmosphere, a cacophony of sparkling lights and pulsing music, laughter ringing in the air. I felt like a ghost in this enchanted realm, where joy thrived, but I was consumed by the darkness that clung to me. The sight of Sarah and Mark laughing together, their bodies swaying to the rhythm of the music, sent a wave of bile rising in my throat. I fought the urge to turn away, instead, channeling that sickening feeling into something fiercer. I spotted my friend Mia across the room and made my way over to her, my heart racing. "You ready for tonight?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with excitement. I forced a smile, but it felt like a mask, a flimsy barrier between me and the storm brewing inside. "Absolutely," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos raging within. As the night wore on, I kept my eyes on Sarah and Mark, waiting for the perfect moment to enact my plan. I could sense the electric charge in the air, a mix of excitement and dread spiraling out of control. I had anticipated this moment for weeks. Every ounce of betrayal I felt morphed into a fire that fueled my determination. Finally, I noticed Sarah stepping away from Mark for a moment, her laughter ringing out like music in the night. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. It was finally time to take back my power, to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I knew that Sarah had been boasting about her new relationship with Mark to their friends, flaunting their so-called love as if it were a trophy. But little did she know, I had crafted an arrangement that would expose not just her treachery, but also draw attention to the depth of her betrayal. With a flick of my phone, I executed the first phase of my plan. I casually approached a group of our classmates, those who had once been friends with both Sarah and me, and struck up a conversation. I dropped hints of Sarah's lies, sharing what I had uncovered about her and Mark's negligent disregard for my feelings. The whispers spread like wildfire, and within moments, an air of tension hung thick around us. "Did you know Sarah and Mark were texting way before the dance?" I sneered, tilting my head in mock sympathy. It's almost like she was waiting for me to get out of the way. The truth dripped from my words like poison, each syllable laced with the bitterness I had cultivated. As I watched their eyes widen, the thrill of manipulation surged through me, intoxicating and overwhelming. Just then, I caught a glimpse of Sarah, her expression changing as she picked up on the murmurs swirling around her. Her smile faltered, and I reveled in the sight. Soon, Mark would be caught in the crossfire, and I would finally see them topple from their pedestal of happiness. As the music swelled, I made my way closer to the dance floor, where the energy pulsed through the air like a living entity. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I took a deep breath, knowing that my moment had arrived. I smiled, knowing that the chaos I had orchestrated was about to reach a fever pitch. And then, I saw it, a flash of movement. Sarah and Mark had come together, laughing, their heads bowed closely as they whispered secrets meant only for each other. I could feel the fire in me roaring to life, propelling me forward. With swift determination, I approached them, weaving through the crowd, each step filled with purpose. "Hey, guys!" I called out, my voice slicing through their bubble like a sharp knife. They turned, surprise etched on their faces. "Having fun?" I asked, my tone deceptively light, but I could see the tension in their eyes. "Joanna," Mark said hesitantly, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What's up?" "Oh, I just thought I'd share a little something I've heard," I said, letting the venom seep into my words. "You know, about how Sarah's been telling everyone that she's the better choice. That she's the one you've always wanted. How sweet of her." My voice dripped with faux admiration, the perfect blend of sarcasm and bitterness. Sarah's face blanched, and I felt a rush of exhilaration at the sight of her unraveling. "Joe, what are you talking about?" She stammered, her bravado slipping. Before I could respond, I pulled out my phone, the very weapon I had wielded to craft this moment. "Oh, you know, just the little messages you thought were private between you and Mark. Here's a little snippet for everyone." I raised my voice, projecting it to the surrounding crowd that had begun to gather, eyes wide with curiosity. The collective gasp echoed through the gym as I showed the screen, their shocked expressions feeding my fury. Sarah's face turned a shade of crimson, and Mark looked utterly bewildered, his expression shifting from confusion to a dawning horror. "What? Joanna, you can't do this." He attempted to protest, but my heart thrummed with victory. "Watch me," I retorted, pushing the boundaries further. "You want to know what real betrayal feels like? Look no further than your own perfect little relationship." My words dripped with malice, and for a moment, I felt invincible, like I had finally reclaimed the narrative. As the crowd began to murmur, the weight of my revenge crashed over me like a tidal wave. I could see Sarah's facade crumble as the truth washed over her, her laughter now replaced by stony silence. But in that moment of triumph, amidst the chaos I had unleashed, a flicker of doubt crept in, a momentary hesitation that whispered that perhaps I had gone too far. The darkness that I had embraced, the revenge that felt so sweet, now tasted bitter on my tongue. The realization swept over me like a cold shiver. I had orchestrated my revenge, but at what cost? Would this moment of glory fill the void left by betrayal? Would it truly bring me peace? As I faced Sarah's devastated expression and Mark's bewilderment, I understood that this moment was as much about them as it was about me. And so began the descent into the unknown, a realization that the path of revenge was never straightforward. The taste of victory was bittersweet, and I stood on the precipice of a choice. Would I embrace the darkness within, or would I find a way to reclaim the light I had lost amidst the shadows? Welcome to the turning point of my story, a point where revenge intertwines with regret, and the lines between right and wrong blur beyond recognition. The journey ahead would demand more from me than I had ever anticipated, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of the chaos I had unleashed. The dance floor hummed with anticipation, but it was my heart that raced, caught between the allure of vengeance and the haunting whispers of the girl I used to be. The night was alive with possibility, and as the music pulsed through my very core, I waited to see where this diabolical path would lead me. As the night unfolded, my mind whirred with the intricate details of the revenge I had so carefully crafted. I had spent weeks plotting, not just for the moment I was now in, but for the aftermath that would ripple through our small town. The first phase had gone off without a hitch. The crowd's reaction ignited a fire within me that couldn't be quelled. But I was far from finished. This was merely the opening act of my grand design. My plan had 3 specific phases, each more calculated than the last, designed to ensure that both Sarah and Mark paid dearly for their betrayal. I had already set the stage with the dramatic exposure of their texts, but I hadn't fully unleashed the chaos yet. I knew that mere shock wouldn't suffice. I needed to dismantle their relationship piece by piece. I began to weave a narrative about Sarah and Mark that would solidify their downfall in the eyes of our peers. While the dance continued, I strategically positioned myself among groups of friends, those who loved a good scandal. I leaned in, my voice low and conspiratorial, as I began to seed doubt. Can you believe Sarah pretended to be my friend while dating Mark behind my back? What a hypocrite! Who would want to be friends with someone like that? The shock on their faces fueled my conviction. I made sure to mention how Sarah had often criticized other girls who'd done the same thing, painting her as a fraud. I guess she thinks she's above the rest of us, but look at the reality. It's just pathetic. With each word, I watched as the crowd swelled with interest, eyes darting toward Sarah and Mark, whispers exchanged like currency. I knew that each ripple of doubt would lead to Sarah becoming increasingly isolated. The more I spread the truth behind her lies, the more her trusted friends would pull away. I had a couple of allies in my corner, those who had also felt the sting of Sarah's past judgments. They were more than willing to join my crusade, reinforcing the whispers I had planted. Did you hear that Sarah's been talking trash about us too? I can't believe she had the audacity to treat Joanna like that while pretending to be her best friend, one of my allies would say, encouraging others to reconsider their friendship with a girl who now stood accused of betrayal. By the end of the night, I could see a shift in the crowd. Sarah's laughter became less frequent, replaced by furtive glances and hushed conversations that pointed her way. She felt the heat of scrutiny, and I lay waiting like a spider in her web, fully aware that the next phase of my revenge was just around the corner. While the first 2 phases were focused on public exposure and sowing discord among their friends, the third phase was where I would really sink my claws in. I planned to orchestrate an event that would expose both Sarah and Mark in a way that would shatter their reputation forever. It was bold and risky, but my heart raced with exhilaration at the thought of pulling it off. The annual school talent show was coming up, a perfect opportunity. I decided to use it as the grand stage for my ultimate act of revenge. I had an idea that would turn the spotlight onto them, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I had a friend who was part of the planning committee, and with a few well-placed subtle hints, I secured a speaking slot for myself. My plan was to utilize my performance to reveal everything to the entire school, live in color. I began drafting a song, an original piece that layered personal anecdotes with biting sarcasm. It would start as a melancholic ballad, drawing the audience into a false sense of security before transitioning into an upbeat, almost mocking tempo that would highlight Sarah's lies and Mark's willingness to betray a friend for a fleeting romantic thrill. I wanted them to hear their betrayal echoed back to them, amplified by the laughter of their peers. As I practiced, I couldn't help but feel a thrill surge through me. The lyrics were sharp, painful, and true. Each time I sang, I envisioned the moment their faces would shift from amusement to horror, as the walls of their carefully constructed world began to crumble around them. "Oh, Sarah," I would sing, "you wore the mask of a friend, but when the lights dimmed, it was me you betrayed in the end." But I didn't stop there. I included snippets of my own pain, painting a vivid picture of how their betrayal had shattered our bond. I wanted the audience to see not just what they had done, but also the emotional toll it had taken on me. I wanted them to understand that betrayal isn't just a fleeting moment, it's a deep wound that lingers long after the act itself. With my plan solidifying, I spent every free moment rehearsing, my body electric with the duality of excitement and dread. I sometimes struggled with the implications of my actions. Was I becoming too consumed? Would my thirst for revenge overshadow the remnants of my former self? But each doubt was drowned out by the intoxicating desire to finally feel powerful again, to reclaim control over my narrative. As the talent show date approached, buzz filled the air. Everyone was talking about the performance I was set to deliver. I could feel the anticipation building, and with it, a sense of urgency. This was about more than revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and letting Sarah and Mark feel the weight of their betrayal, live before everyone who had ever loved and respected me. On the night of the talent show, I dressed with meticulous care, slipping into my favorite black dress. It wasn't just an outfit, it was armor. I could hear the chatter of students filling the auditorium, their voices washing over me like a wave. I could only imagine how Sarah felt, knowing her secret was about to be unveiled. The thought ignited a fire in my chest. As I took my place backstage, the adrenaline coursing through my veins felt like electricity. My heart thumped loudly. The anticipation of revenge was both terrifying and exhilarating. I could see Sarah and Mark in the crowd, laughing and whispering, completely unaware of the storm brewing just behind the curtain. As my name was called, the world faded away, leaving only the stage before me. A spotlight illuminated my figure, and I stepped into the blinding light, my heart racing with every step. I searched the crowd, my eyes locking on Sarah's bright smile. In that moment, I felt a cruel sense of satisfaction. It was time for her to face the truth. I took a deep breath, the microphone cool against my palm, and opened my mouth to sing. The first notes flowed like a rush of water, wrapping around the audience and drawing them in. I started with soft, haunting melodies that told a story of hope and friendship, painting a picture of what we used to be. I could feel Sarah's gaze on me, but I didn't waver. Instead, I pressed on, each note becoming sharper, each word carrying the weight of betrayal. As I transitioned into the second verse, my voice shifted, morphing into a biting satire. The laughter came. It echoed through the auditorium, but this time it was directed at Sarah. The lyrics dripped with irony, my heart racing as I watched their expressions twist from amusement to confusion, and finally to shock. The final chorus exploded with energy, the rhythm quickening as I drove home the truth of their betrayal. You thought you'd found the prize, but you played with my heart like a game. Now, here's the truth, the only one to blame. The audience erupted in laughter, and I could see Sarah's face drain of color, Mark's eyes wide with realization. And then, just as I reached the climax, I pulled out my phone and projected the damning evidence onto the large screen behind me. Screenshots of their texts filled the room, words echoing the betrayal they had crafted together. Did you really think it wouldn't come to light? That your lies wouldn't be exposed under the bright spotlight? The gasps filled the auditorium like wildfire, and I reveled in the chaos I had unleashed. The laughter turned to murmurs, and the audience erupted into whispers, marveling at the spectacle unfolding before them. I locked eyes with Sarah, her expression morphing from shock to despair, and I felt a rush of satisfaction course through me as the truth hung heavy in the air. I had done it. I had executed my plan flawlessly, and the taste of victory felt bittersweet on my tongue. I wasn't sure if I had accomplished my goal or if I had simply added another layer of pain onto an already broken friendship. But in that moment, standing on the stage with the spotlight on me, I felt, at least for a fleeting second, like I had finally reclaimed my power. As I stepped off the stage, I could hear the whispers begin to swirl, fueled by the revelations I had made. I knew there would be repercussions, but I welcomed them like an old friend. I had freed myself from the weight of betrayal, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. But as I took a moment to breathe, I felt a flicker of doubt creep back in. Was revenge worth the cost of our friendship? Was victory truly mine if it meant losing a piece of myself in the process? The questions clung to my heart like shadows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps the true battle was only just beginning. Welcome to the crossroads of my journey, where revenge intertwines with regret, and the path forward remains uncertain. My name is Joanna, and this is just the beginning of my story, a tale that would forever be labeled as I stepped off the stage. The uproar of the crowd faded into a distant hum, overshadowed by the storm brewing inside me. I had exposed their betrayal, and yet, the moment felt dangerously hollow. The adrenaline surged through my veins, electrifying every nerve, urging me to celebrate. But as I glanced back at Sarah, crumpled and shattered in the spotlight of her own making, an unsettling cloud of doubt loomed over me. The once vibrant laughter around me began to morph into hushed whispers, the energy in the auditorium shifting like the tide. I caught sight of Mia, my friend who had helped me weave this tapestry of revenge, her eyes wide with shock and perhaps a hint of concern. Had I gone too far? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but the lingering satisfaction of retribution momentarily stifled my guilt. As the crowd began to dissipate, I felt a tugging sensation, a pull toward Sarah, who had now turned her back to the audience, her shoulders shaking with sobs. It was a sight I had craved, and yet, witnessing her anguish felt like a double-edged sword. The bitter taste of revenge began to sour in my mouth as I wrestled with my conflicting emotions. "Joanna." Mark's voice cut through the cacophony as he approached me, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. What the hell was that? I braced myself, ready to unleash a torrent of words that had been brewing within me ever since I discovered their betrayal. "What did you want me to do, Mark? Sit back and let you both pretend like nothing happened? Like I didn't matter?" He opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself or to shift blame back to me, but nothing came out. Instead, he just stared at me, eyes wide, lost in disbelief. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, a desperate attempt to reconcile the girl he thought he knew with the hurricane I had become. "Joe, this isn't the way to handle things. You've hurt Sarah, and you've hurt me," he pleaded, the softness of his voice almost breaking my resolve. A surge of anger sparked within me. "You don't get to play the victim here, Mark. You chose to betray me. You and Sarah both did this to me." The room had emptied out around us, leaving only the distant echoes of the crowd behind. My heart raced as I watched Sarah slip away, someone else guiding her through the auditorium, her emotional turmoil palpable even from a distance. I needed this moment. I had worked too hard to let it slip away now. But, as the adrenaline from my performance faded, reality seeped in, thick and suffocating. I was standing in the aftermath of my vengeance, and the consequences weighed heavily on my chest. The cheers from the performance still echoed in my ears, but now they felt like a funeral dirge, a dirge for the friendship I had obliterated. "Joanna, I can't believe you would do this," Mark finally said, his voice heavy with reproach. "You've gone too far. Sarah is hurting, and you need to understand the pain you've caused." "Pain? You think I don't know pain?" I shot back, my voice laced with desperation. "You broke my heart. You both did. You had everything, and you threw it away like it meant nothing." I could see the flicker of regret in Mark's eyes, but the darkness of my revenge loomed larger than any remorse I saw. "Maybe you should think about that before throwing gas on the fire," he said, his voice softening as if he were trying to reach the remnants of the girl I used to be. But I was far from that girl now. I had become a specter of vengeance. Suddenly, the reality of my actions began to wrap around me like a vice. I had become the very monster I sought to destroy, full of anger and rage, driven by the need to make them feel the way I had felt. The joy I expected to feel gradually morphed into something darker, a realization that maybe their betrayal didn't deserve this level of wrath. I turned, searching for Sarah amid the remaining crowd, but she was gone. The weight of my actions crashed over me like a wave, and the adrenaline that had once surged through me was replaced by a deep sense of remorse. In my quest for revenge, I had not only lost her friendship but had become a stranger to myself, a girl blinded by fury, marching toward darkness with no thought of the light. "Joanna," Mark's voice broke through the haze, pulling me back, from the depths of my thoughts. "This isn't who you are. You have to let this go." His words echoed in my mind, reverberating against the walls I had built in my heart. I could feel the cracks forming, the walls crumbling beneath the weight of my actions. In that moment, standing in the remnants of my revenge, I took a deep breath, letting the cold air sear through my lungs. For the first time, I reconsidered the path I had taken. As the realization settled like dust within me, I knew I had a choice to make. Would I continue down this path of darkness, or could I find a way to reclaim the light I once held? The shadows whispered temptingly in my ear, urging me to hold on to my anger, to keep pushing Sarah and Mark away. But at what cost? The auditorium echoed hollowly around me, the remnants of laughter and cheers fading into a silence that felt deafening. I had hurt the people who once meant the world to me, and now I stood amid the wreckage of our friendship. Suddenly, a decision surged through me, a resolve to confront not just Sarah and Mark, but the very essence of my pain. I could feel the tide shifting within me, the remnants of the girl I used to be clawing their way back into my consciousness. I felt the swell of courage rising within me, bolstered by the truth that I was tired of living in the darkness. With one last glance at Mark, I whispered, "I'm sorry." And with that, I took a step forward, determined to face Sarah, to confront the betrayal, and to reclaim my narrative. It was time to break the cycle of hurt and find the strength to heal, not just myself, but the shattered pieces of our friendship. The night was far from over, and the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I was ready to step into the light. I would not become a victim of vengeance, I would not let my heart drown in bitterness. As I made my way through the remnants of the dance, a newfound resolve filled my heart. The battle for my soul was just beginning, and I would fight to reclaim not only what I had lost but also the person I had once been. Welcome to the climax of my story, a turning point where the thirst for revenge transformed into a quest for redemption, and the light began to break through the shadows. My name is Joanna, and this is where my journey truly begins. In the days that followed the talent show, the ripples of my actions reverberated through our small town like a tremor beneath the earth's surface. I had set my proverbial bomb off, and the shrapnel of my revenge lay scattered, piercing the hearts of everyone involved, most notably me. The laughter and excitement from the night of the performance faded quickly, leaving behind a heavy silence that echoed in my mind. I became a specter in the hallways at school, my once vibrant presence all but extinguished. Sarah had become a ghost of her former self, and Mark wore the weary look of someone who had just survived a storm. They were both feeling the fallout of my revenge, but so was I. In the first light of dawn the next day, reality hit me like a freight train. I woke up, the adrenaline from the night before dissipating into a thick layer of dread that clung to my skin. My heart felt heavy, weighed down by the burden of what I had done. I had sought vengeance, but what I had truly unleashed was a whirlwind of hurt that left all of us reeling. The whispers that had once been fuel for my fire now felt like daggers slicing through my heart. I was no longer the girl with dreams, I had become the architect of my own pain, and I was haunted by the aftermath of my choices. Friends who once looked at me with admiration now whispered behind my back, some even crossing the hall to avoid me completely. I had become an outcast, and the irony was not lost on me. The very isolation I had intended for Sarah and Mark now wrapped around me like a shroud. In the weeks that followed, I watched as the once inseparable trio of Sarah, Mark, and me crumbled to dust. Their relationship disintegrated under the weight of public scrutiny, but my heart ached at the thought of what I had done. I had turned two people I once loved into pariahs, each suffering under the weight of betrayal while I stood under the heavy burden of regret. I spent countless nights replaying the events, trying to figure out if I could have handled things differently. Thoughts echoed in my mind. Could I have confronted Sarah with honesty instead of vengeance? Should I have sought closure rather than revenge? But the answers felt elusive, trapped beneath the rubble of my choices. And then came the moment that would change everything, a moment I never thought I would face. Sarah reached out to me, a simple text that read, "Can we talk?" My heart raced as I stared at the screen, emotions bubbling to the surface. The girl I had once called my best friend was reaching out, seeking connection amidst the wreckage I had created. I hesitated, fear coursing through me like ice. What would I say to her? Did I even have the right to face her after everything? But deep down, I knew I couldn't run from this. I needed closure, and perhaps she did too. When we met later that week at our favorite cafe, a cozy corner nook that had once been filled with laughter and dreams, the air was thick with unspoken words. I could see the pain etched on Sarah's face, her eyes red-rimmed and weary. "Joe," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't even know how to start this. I miss you. I miss our friendship." The weight of her words hit me like a tidal wave. "I miss us too," I admitted, my voice a quiet whisper. "But I hurt you. I hurt you both." She nodded, tears spilling over as she looked down, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her coffee cup. "You exposed us in a way I never thought I'd have to face. But I deserve it. I betrayed you. We talked for hours, each word piercing the silence that had grown like a chasm between us. We discussed the betrayal, the pain, and the mistakes we had both made. I realized then that revenge had not brought me peace, it had only deepened the scars, both in me and in her. I thought that hurting you would make me feel better, I confessed, guilt clawing at my insides. But it only made things worse. I didn't want to lose you, and in trying to hurt you, I lost myself. The conversation we shared that day was cathartic, a release that allowed us both to breathe again. We acknowledged the betrayal and the hurt, but also the love that had once bound us together. It was a fragile moment, a flicker of hope amidst the darkness I had created. But as much as I wanted to mend things, I knew that rebuilding trust would take time. There was a long road ahead, fraught with memories that would linger like shadows, but the first step had been taken. We began to work on a new foundation, one that acknowledged the mistakes of our past while looking forward to a future that was uncertain but no longer filled with bitterness. In the weeks that followed, I also sought to repair my relationship with Mark. He was angry, and rightfully so, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes when I finally approached him. We exchanged words, slowly unraveling the tension that had grown between us. I was wrong to take my pain out on you, I admitted, the weight of my guilt lifting slightly. You didn't deserve what I did. Mark nodded, the tension in his shoulders softening a fraction. I appreciate that, Joe. But it's going to take time for us to get back to anything resembling normal. I accepted that, for I, too, had a long journey ahead. But that journey had to start with honesty, with the courage to confront my emotions rather than mask them with vengeance. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself navigating the complexities of friendship anew, learning how to forgive, not just Sarah and Mark, but myself. Each day was a step toward healing, a gradual reclamation of my identity where bitterness had once taken root. In the quiet moments, I often reflected on the lessons I had learned from this diabolical journey, how the thirst for revenge can lead to a cycle of pain rather than closure. I realized that healing required vulnerability and honesty, and that true strength lies in embracing our imperfections rather than hiding behind walls built on anger. And when I looked in the mirror now, I saw the echoes of the girl I had once been, the girl with dreams and hopes, but also someone who now carried the weight of a painful lesson learned. Rather than allow that lesson to define me, I chose to let it guide me toward growth. In the end, the price of betrayal had been steep, but the journey toward redemption was proving to be worth every scar. I stood at a crossroads, not entirely sure of my destination, but hopeful that the path ahead would lead to something brighter. After all, in a world where shadows loom large, it is the light we choose to walk toward that ultimately defines us. I knew that the scars of betrayal would fade, but the strength I had gained from this journey would remain. So this is me, Joanna, no longer just a girl seeking revenge but a woman learning to forgive, to heal, and to reclaim her own story in the most diabolical of ways. And as I step into the light, I carry with me the hope of a new beginning, a chance to rise from the ashes of betrayal and sculpt a future where love, trust, and resilience reign supreme.